If you're thinking about taking a night shift security job because it sounds like getting paid to sit alone and watch empty hallways, let me tell you what my supervisor told me on day one. If the cameras are quiet, that's good. He didn't add the part I learned later, which is that quiet on a monitor can mean someone is standing so still the system stops treating them like movement. I worked overnights at the Westbridge Medical Annex, an old hospital wing that had been stripped into a maze of long corridors, storage rooms, and temporary construction walls. My post was a glass booth by the loading bay, with a wall of CCTV screens, 16 feeds, each with a number burned into the corner. The rule was simple: if a motion sensor triggered, check the corresponding camera, then do a quick patrol if it looked like a person. The first few nights were boring in the way people romanticize humming fluorescent lights. A coffee that tasted like cardboard, the building settling and creaking like it was breathing in its sleep. Then at 1:13 a.m. on a Tuesday, the motion panel lit up for Corridor C, and my eyes snapped to Camera 4. Camera 4 was a long shot down Corridor C, a straight hallway that ended at a heavy metal door with a faded sign that still said Basement Access in hospital blue letters. The picture was grainy, but the corridor lights were on, and there, halfway between the camera and that basement door, was a dark figure, standing perfectly still. Not walking, not swaying, not doing the normal human micro movements you expect when someone is trying to be quiet. Just a silhouette, with shoulders too square and arms hanging at its sides like it had been placed there. My first thought was trespasser. My second thought was prank. My third thought was the one that made my stomach tighten. The figure looked too tall for the hallway's proportions, like it didn't quite belong in the frame. I hit the digital zoom. The image crawled closer, pixels smearing, and the figure stayed featureless, a void where a face should be. No reflective eyes, no pale skin, no detail at all. The motion panel was still lit, which meant the sensor had detected something, but the person on the feed wasn't moving. I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and keys, and I walked the route I'd walked a dozen times already. Corridor C smelled like drywall dust and old disinfectant. The lights buzzed. The basement door was at the far end shut, with a padlock hanging from the latch, like a promise. The hallway was empty. No footsteps fading, no door closing, nobody hiding behind a cart. I stood there for a full minute listening, because you can hear a living person if you give the building enough silence. Nothing. I keyed my radio and said, "All clear camera, 4 trigger." Probably a false. When I got back to the booth, I expected the feed to be empty. It wasn't. The figure was still there, except now it was closer to the camera by several feet. Not running, not walking, just closer, like the frame had been cut and replaced with a new one. My skin prickled. I rewound the DVR by 2 minutes and watched the clip. In the playback, the corridor was empty. Then the sensor triggered, and the figure was simply there, already standing in the middle of the hall as if it had loaded in. No entrance, no approach. It didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even pixel flicker like a glitch. I told myself it was a camera fault, a shadow, an artifact. I toggled to camera 3, which covered the intersection that led into Corridor C. Camera 3 showed an empty intersection. I toggled to camera 5, which covered the opposite end near the stairwell. Empty. Only camera 4 had the figure, and it was still facing the camera like it knew I was watching. The next hour turned into a pattern I couldn't explain. Every time I left the booth and walked Corridor C, the hall was empty. Every time I returned, the figure on camera 4 was closer, like it had advanced while I was away and then frozen again. By 2 a.m., it was close enough that I could see edges, long sleeves, a collar line, something like a hood. At 2:19, it was close enough that the blackness where its face should be filled most of the head shape. At 2:33, the figure was so close that the top of its shoulders were cut off by the bottom of the frame, like it had stepped right up to the camera lens. I did the only thing that felt logical. I checked the physical camera. Camera 4 was mounted high on the corridor wall, its dome housing reflecting the hallway lights. I stood under it and looked straight up. The lens pointed down Corridor C, exactly where it should. There was no one behind me. The hallway was empty. I walked back to the booth, fast, heart punching. On the monitor, camera 4 was no longer showing Corridor C. It was showing the inside of my booth. The angle was high, like from a corner, near the ceiling. aimed directly at my chair and the desk. I froze, because I didn't have a camera in the booth. The company didn't mention why, but there I was on the screen standing in front of the monitors, staring up, looking exactly as scared as I felt. In the bottom right of that feed, in the shadowy corner behind the coat rack, something was standing perfectly still. It was the same tall shape tucked into the corner where your eyes don't want to settle. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I watched my own body on the monitor, watched myself take a step backward, watched my shoulders rise as if I was trying to hold my breath. Then my phone vibrated with a notification I hadn't enabled on that work device. Camera. Full motion detected. The only thing moving on the feed was me. The figure in the corner didn't move at all, and the system still called it motion. My radio crackled with nothing but static. Then a soft click, like someone tapping a fingernail on plastic near a microphone. I forced myself to turn around, slowly. The corner behind the coat rack was empty. The air smelled normal. The fluorescent lights hummed. I looked back at the monitor, and the feed had cut back to corridor C, as if nothing had happened. Empty corridor, padlocked, basement door, no figure. I rewound the DVR again, desperate to capture proof. The playback showed me in the booth feed, but in the clip, I didn't turn around slowly, like I remembered. I turned my head in a stiff, delayed motion, as if someone had edited my reaction, and the figure in the corner was clearer in the playback than it had been live, tall, narrow arms, too long face, a flat absence. When I paused on the frame, the timestamp in the corner didn't match my booth clock. It was ahead by exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes was the gap between me leaving the booth and returning each time. 4 minutes was how long it took to walk corridor C and back. I stared at that number until the explanation that made the least sense became the only one left. Camera 4 wasn't showing me what was happening. It was showing me what was going to happen. At 3:01 a.m., the motion panel lit up again for corridor C. I looked at camera 4, and the figure was back in the hall, right at the basement door, now standing, with its head angled slightly, as if it was reading the sign. The padlock was still on the latch in the live feed. I never finished that shift. I signed out, left my badge on the counter, and walked into the parking lot without checking the monitors again. The next day, the manager told me camera 4 had been offline all night. I still have the last screenshot. My booth empty with something standing in the corner where the cameras can't see. You learn fast on night shift that the hardest part isn't staying awake. It's convincing yourself you're not making patterns out of static. After I quit Westbridge, I took a temporary contract at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. The kind of place that smells like cardboard dust and cold metal. With aisles so long, your flashlight beam dies before it reaches the end. The client didn't care about thieves as much as liability. So my job was simple. Sit in a glass booth at the front gate. Watch 8 CCTV feeds. And do a patrol every hour so the company could say they were monitoring the premises. On my first night, the supervisor pointed at the camera grid and warned me about raccoons, triggering motion sensors and forklifts parked too close to the loading doors. Then he tapped the screen for camera 2, the one that watched the main floor from a high corner near the ceiling. If anything moves, it'll show up there, he said. Like that was comforting. Around 2:17 a.m. Camera 2 showed a figure standing in the far back of aisle 14, right where the shelving makes a blind wedge in the corner of the frame. It wasn't walking. It wasn't crouching. It was just there, tall, thin, too still, like someone had stepped into the corner and decided not to leave. I leaned closer and adjusted the zoom, expecting the image to break into pixels, but it stayed clean enough for me to see the outline of shoulders and the pale suggestion of a face turned toward the camera. The motion sensor map didn't light up. The system didn't register a person. It only registered the fact that I was staring. I grabbed my flashlight and did the thing you do when you're trying to be professional about something that feels wrong. I logged the time, keyed my radio, and walked the floor. Aisle 14 was empty. The concrete was clean. The shelves were stacked. The only sound was the distant hum of refrigeration units. I stood in the corner that had been occupied on camera and turned in place, scanning between pallets and shrink wrap. And I felt stupid, because it was the kind of stupid you feel right before something proves you right. I went back to the booth, and camera 2 still showed the figure. Still in that corner. Except now, it was closer. Like it had moved while I was gone. Not enough for a motion alert. Just enough to change the shape. My skin crawled. I rewound the footage a few minutes, expecting to see it walk into frame. But the tape showed nothing until one instant where the figure simply existed. Like a file that had loaded late, I told myself it was a reflection, a compression artifact, a ghost made of bad lighting and exhaustion. Then, camera 5. The one aimed at the same aisle from the opposite end, flickered, and for a single second showed the figure's back, as if it had turned away from camera 2 to face the other lens. Choosing which direction to be watched from, I did another patrol. Slower this time, listening for breathing, for rustling plastic, for any evidence that a living person was playing a game. Again, the corner was empty. When I returned to the booth, the figure was still on camera 2. And this time, it wasn't in Aisle 14 at all. It was in the empty break room, standing in the corner beside the vending machine. A place that didn't even have a motion sensor because nobody was supposed to be there overnight. The camera view was wide. The fluorescent lights were on timers, and the figure was positioned exactly where the ceiling angle would make it hardest to see details. I watched, frozen, as the figure's head lifted slightly, not toward the room, but toward the lens, like it knew the camera was the only eye that mattered. My radio crackled once, a burst of static, and then a voice came through that wasn't my supervisor and wasn't dispatch. It was calm, flat, and close, like someone speaking into the mic inches from my ear. Corner. It said, just that. I yanked the radio away from my mouth and checked the channel. The display showed my normal frequency. I keyed the mic and asked if anyone was on the line. Static answered. Then the same voice, quieter. Don't stand in corners. I stared at the radio until my hands started to shake. I looked up at the cameras again. Camera 2 showed the break room corner. Camera 6 showed the front corridor outside my booth. In the corner of camera 6's frame, half hidden by a stack of empty pallets, was the same tall outline. Close enough now that it should have triggered the motion sensor at my door. The sensor stayed dark. The figure didn't move. It just occupied the corner like it had been poured there. I sat very still, because I had learned the worst lesson already when you move. You become the only motion the system cares about. I forced myself to do a third patrol anyway, because part of security work is refusing to admit you're scared. I walked the corridor outside my booth. The pallets were exactly where they'd been. No person. No shadow. No sound. I crouched and peered behind the pallets, and my flashlight beam cut through dust and empty air. When I stood up, I felt a cold draft brush the back of my neck, like someone exhaling behind me. I spun around too fast, and my light swung across the floor, and I saw nothing but the long, empty hallway. I went back into the booth and locked the door. Camera 6 still showed the figure in the corridor corner, except now it was facing the booth, as if it were watching me watch it. I rewound the feed to see if it had moved, and the tape showed the figure in the corner the whole time. Unmoving. Perfect. Like it had been pasted onto the image. That's when I noticed something smaller. Something that made my stomach drop in a different way, in the lower right corner of the CCTV overlay, where the system usually stamps the temperature and the camera ID. There was a new label that I had never seen before. It didn't say Camera 6. It said Corner View. My hands went numb. The warehouse cameras didn't have a mode called Corner View. I clicked the label to open the camera settings, and the menu wasn't the warehouse menu anymore. It was a plain black panel with white text, like an old terminal. The only option highlighted was a toggle Enable Subject Tracking. Beneath it was a line of small text, Optimizes Corner Occupancy. I slammed the mouse down and tried to close the window. It wouldn't close. The radio crackled again, and the voice returned, almost amused. You keep checking, it said, so we keep standing. I whispered to myself that it wasn't real, that someone had hacked the DVR, that it was a prank by a bored tech. Then the figure on camera 6 did the first thing I could describe as movement. It leaned a fraction out of the corner, just enough for the camera to catch the side of its face, and I saw the pale oval of skin, the darkness where eyes should be, and the curve of a mouth that looked like it was trying to remember how to smile. My booth door handle rattled once, gently, as if someone had tested it with 2 fingers. The motion sensor at the booth finally lit up, bright red, and the alarm tone began to chirp. The last image was my booth from a ceiling angle I didn't recognize, and in the back left corner, behind my chair, something tall stood perfectly still, darker than the shadow it should have cast. I refused to turn my head. I just stood up, walked out, and kept walking until sunrise. When I came back for my check, the manager showed me the booth corner. The paint was scraped and the floor dust had a clean oval, as if something had been standing there for hours. If you ever work a graveyard security shift and the motion sensors won't stop firing, here's the detail. Nobody tells you the alarms don't just wake you up. They train you. After enough false hits, your brain starts moving before you think, because you'd rather be tired than wrong. I learned that at Meridian Plaza, a downtown office tower half abandoned and half renovated, with lights on, timers, and hallways that all looked the same. My post was a security room off the loading dock, with a monitor wall and a motion map panel split into zones. The rule was simple: acknowledge every alarm, check the camera, patrol if it looked real. On the 3rd night, at 1241 a.m., Zone 12B tripped. Camera 12B showed an empty, new painted hallway, but the motion panel stayed red, as if something kept moving. Exactly 90 seconds later, Zone 12C tripped, then 12D, then 12E. Marching down the corridor at a steady pace, I zoomed in on each feed, expecting a shadow or a flashlight beam. But every screen stayed clean and empty. I grabbed my flashlight and went up anyway, because the first rule of night work is you don't ignore an alarm just because it annoys you. Floor 12 was silent except for dehumidifiers and my own steps. No footprints in the dust. No doors cracked. No elevator ping. No hiding place that made sense. I stood under the nearest motion sensor and waved my arm. Nothing. I waved again. Nothing. The panel downstairs had lit up without me. Back at the booth, the panel lit Zone 11B. Then 11C. Same cadence. As if whatever was walking on 12 simply dropped one floor the moment I stopped looking. I did another patrol. Then another. And by 2A. I'd chased 15 alarms and never seen a single thing. The building started to feel like a maze that moved when you looked away. Each time I returned to the booth, the panel would go quiet for just long enough to make me believe the night had settled. Then it would start again. Always in a line. Always at a pace that matched a calm walk. The pattern was too perfect. And that was what finally scared me. Nature doesn't do perfect intervals. People do. So I tested it. I shut the booth door and sat very still. Hands flat on the desk. Eyes on the motion panel. For 2 minutes it stayed quiet. And I almost believed I'd won. Then it chimed anyway, Zone 12B. Then 12C. Then 12D. Right on schedule. Even though I hadn't moved an inch. That's when it stopped feeling like a false alarm and started feeling like a route someone was running for me. I pulled up the event log and noticed every alarm was marked verified. As if a camera had confirmed it. My screens had shown nothing. So I clicked the verification thumbnail. It was a grainy still of a hallway corner on floor 12. A wedge of shadow where two walls met. And in that wedge was a tall, narrow shape that didn't resolve into clothing or skin. Just a vertical absence. Under it, the system had added a note I'd never seen before, subject present. I tried to do the practical thing. I disabled Zone 12B in the panel settings, just to see if the line would break. The system accepted the command and turned 12B gray. 90 seconds later, the panel chimed for 12C anyway. Then 12D. Then 12E. As if the route didn't need the starting point anymore. That was the moment I realized I wasn't investigating motion. I was being measured for reaction time. The next alert hit on my phone. Stairwell 2. The one that led down toward my loading dock. The stairwell camera showed empty steps and cinder block walls. But the alert repeated sooner this time. 60 seconds. Then again. As if the pace had changed because it was closer. I heard a faint sound in the booth then. Not a footstep. Not a voice. Just a tiny tap, like something brushing plastic. I told myself it was the vent, expanding. The tapping repeated. Patient. Rhythmic. The panel chimed. Loading dock 1. The sensor outside my door. I didn't open it. I watched through the booth glass into the service corridor that ended in a dark corner by the fire riser. The overhead light flickered once. A clean blink that made the air smell faintly of ozone. And in that blink, I saw a figure standing in that corner. Perfectly still. Facing my booth. When the light steadied, the corner was empty again. But the motion panel stayed lit, as if the corridor was still occupied. My radio popped with static, and I heard the tapping again. Louder now. Like a fingernail on the radio casing. Then a calm voice came through. Too close to be reassuring. Good. Patrol. I asked who was on channel. Static answered. Then the voice again. Don't run the route twice. I didn't have dispatch. I didn't have a partner. There shouldn't have been any voice at all. The motion panel chimed 3 times fast, and every zone lit red at once. Like the building had suddenly filled with movement everywhere. Every camera feed stayed empty. Then I noticed something on camera LD. The loading dock feed, the far end of the corridor looked slightly darker than it should. Like the lens was compressing shadow into a solid shape. It didn't move, but it held the frame the way a person holds a doorway. That's when a little picture-in-picture window appeared on my main screen. One I hadn't opened. It was labeled Booth Cam. It showed my security room from above. A ceiling angle looking down on my chair and desk. On that feed, I was sitting in the chair, perfectly still. Even though in real life, I was standing, then the version of me on the screen turned slowly and looked straight up toward the camera. Deliberate. Like a person acknowledging the lens. I did not turn. My hands went cold. Behind the chair in the darkest corner, where the filing cabinet met the wall, something tall stood perfectly still. No face. No hands. Just the same corner-occupying shape I'd been chasing all night. I backed away from the monitors and the booth door handle rattled once. Gentle. Like a test. The radio tapped again, and the voice said, almost amused, "You're late." I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. The booth feed showed the seated version of me still turning, still looking up, while the thing behind him never moved at all. Then the window vanished and the screens returned to normal, as if it had never been there. I tried to rewind the DVR to prove to myself I wasn't losing it, and the playback jumped 2 minutes missing. A clean cut, like someone had edited the tape. The motion panel went quiet. I stood in the silence, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. It didn't. At 4:58 a.m., 5 minutes before relief, the panel chimed one last time. Zone 12B. Only this time, it didn't say motion detected. It said, route complete. I left my keys on the desk and walked out into the dawn without signing out. Later, the contractor called to ask why I quit. I told him the sensors were broken. He laughed and said, "Those sensors are brand new." Then he added, like it was a harmless quirk, "But they do this weird thing sometimes. After a while, they start predicting where you'll be." I looked at my patrol log after the call and realized the intervals weren't random at all. 90 seconds wasn't a sensor timer. It was my own walking pace, measured and repeated back to me until the building knew my route better than I did. 2 days later, I went back in daylight to grab the last check and pretend I'd been sick. And the site foreman walked me to the loading dock like he was doing me a favor. On the motion panel, taped to the bottom edge where your hand rests when you acknowledge an alarm, was a thin strip of black electrical tape with one word written in neat white ink: route. The first time you rewatch security footage after a weird night, you're usually hunting for a normal explanation, a reflection, a glitch, a trespasser who slipped through a blind spot. But sometimes the tape doesn't clear things up. It gets personal, like it's been waiting for you to press play. I learned that at a self-storage facility with endless metal doors, strip lights, and a keypad gate that logged every entry. I sat in a tiny office by the gate with 9 feeds and a landline that almost never rang. On my 5th night, at 3:12 a.m., camera 7 showed Building C's corridor. The hall was empty. Unit numbers painted on each door. Then the image stuttered, and a person appeared at the far end in front of Unit C-37. Back to the camera. Perfectly still. I hit the intercom tone that plays a warning down the corridor. No reaction. The motion sensor for Building C didn't trigger. I watched the figure stand there for 3 minutes, like it was part of the building. And that stillness convinced me it had to be a person. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. The access log said nobody had entered Building C since midnight. I keyed in, stepped into the corridor, and found nothing. Unit C-37 was shut and padlocked. Latch. Solid. I rattled it until my knuckles hurt. Walked the length of the hall. Then went back to the office, angry at myself for getting spooked over pixels. Back on the monitor, the corridor was empty again, like the figure had never existed. A minute later, the landline rang. When I answered, there was only breathing, steady. Close, then a click. No voice. Just confirmation. At 333, the corridor feed stuttered again, and the figure was closer now. Halfway down the hall, still facing C-37. Still not moving. The access log still showed no entry. Camera 5 on the keypad door showed it never opening. I did another patrol anyway. Again, the corridor was empty. Again, C-37 was locked. So I rewound the DVR. I pulled playback for camera 7 from 300 to 340. The timeline bar looked clean. At 3, 1, 2. The figure appeared the same way, instant. Like an edit, but this time the tape showed the figure's head turn slightly. Just enough to catch a pale cheek and a smile too thin to be friendly. On the live feed, it hadn't moved. On the tape, it turned like it knew I'd come back. Then the tape showed me entering the corridor, my uniform. My flashlight beam walking straight to Unit C-37. I stopped in the exact spot where the figure had stood and pressed my palm flat to the metal door as if I was checking for vibration. I didn't remember doing that. The strip lights flickered once, and the playback jumped forward 8 seconds with no error message. When it resumed, I was closer to the door, and the figure was gone. I rewound and watched again. Same flicker, same missing 8 seconds. Like the tape refused to show what happened in that gap. I went frame by frame and caught the only clue in the glossy paint of the door. There was a second shape behind me, taller than me, standing just out of the camera's view. It wasn't in the corridor, it was in the reflection, like it belonged to the surface. I rewound and checked again. The reflection looked different, closer, and my stomach dropped because recordings aren't supposed to change. I played forward to 333. The figure reappeared closer. And again the tape showed me walking back into the hall. Except this time, I didn't rattle the padlock. I opened Unit C-37. The lock wasn't even there in the footage. The roll-up door lifted, and I stepped inside like it was routine. I sat back hard, because I knew I hadn't opened that unit. I could still feel the cold weight of the padlock from the real corridor, but the tape showed my flashlight beam vanish into the dark. The strip lights flickered again, and the timeline jumped 7 minutes gone. When it resumed, the unit door was down and I was walking back toward the keypad with my flashlight lowered. Calm. As if the night had resolved itself. Then the figure appeared again. Facing the camera now, it pressed a hand to the door exactly where I'd pressed my palm. Then lifted its finger and pointed straight down the corridor at the lens. Straight at me. My office camera popped up in a little window by itself. Ceiling corner view. I was sitting at the desk watching playback, behind my chair. In the corner, where the filing cabinet met the wall, a tall shape stood perfectly still. I spun around in real life. The corner was empty, on the screen. The shape stayed there, like it preferred being recorded over being seen. The DVR cursor froze on the word complete, like it was waiting for my reaction. The landline rang again. Twice. Then stopped. Then rang a third time. And when I finally answered, all I heard was the same, calm breathing and a faint tapping. Like a fingernail on plastic. Keeping time. I tried to export the clip to a thumb drive so I could show the manager. But the export button was grayed out. And the system flashed a tiny warning I'd never seen before. Playback only. I stood up to check the office corner one more time, and the office feed showed me doing it a half second before I moved. Like the camera was leading my body instead of recording it. That small delay was worse than a ghost, because it felt like rehearsal. White text appeared over the office feed. Rewatch complete. Under it, return what you took. I didn't understand until I checked my belt and realized my keyring felt lighter. The master key tag for building C was gone. The one you sign out and return. I tore through my pockets. Checked the desk. Checked the floor. Gone. I checked the paper sign-out sheet in the drawer, and my initials were there beside the master key line. Written in my own sloppy handwriting. I hadn't signed anything. I rewound the office camera feed and watched myself tape me open the key drawer. Remove the tag. And hook it back on my belt like it belonged there. While the real me sat at the desk with both hands in view, somewhere out on the property. Faint through the office wall, I heard the metallic rattle of a roll-up door being lifted. Slow and careful, like someone trying not to make noise. At dawn, my relief walked in, and I told him I was done. He laughed like I was quitting over boredom. Then, as I was leaving, he called after me. Casual hey. Weird question. Unit C, 37's padlock was missing this morning. You didn't move it, did you? I drove home with my hands locked on the wheel. Around noon, the manager called and said the system showed activity at C37. Like I'd accessed it. I hung up without explaining. Because the tape had already built a version of me that did things I couldn't prove I hadn't done. That night, my phone lit up with a notification from a number I didn't recognize. No text. Just one attached, still image. It was the inside of a storage unit, lit by a flashlight beam. In the center of the concrete floor was my uniform jacket, folded neatly like someone had returned it. And beside it, perfectly upright, was a padlock with my fingerprint smudged across the metal. In the bottom corner of the image, barely visible, was the same white text overlay the DVR had used. Rewatch available. I enlarged the photo until the pixels broke and noticed the flashlight beam wasn't coming from my hand. It was coming from behind the camera, as if someone else was filming the inside of the unit while I stood somewhere out of frame. The next image arrived a minute later, the keypad log screen. Timestamped 3:33 a.m. showing my code entered perfectly on the first try. The first time I blamed it on a glitch. Because that's what security guards do when the screen shows something your brain doesn't want to accept. You look for a technical excuse before you look for a threat. I was working nights at a small corporate campus where the buildings were modern, quiet, and mostly empty after 7 p.m. The kind of place that feels sterile until you're the only heartbeat in it. My station was a windowless security room with a monitor wall, a DVR rack, and a metal desk that held a binder of procedures. nobody followed. The cameras were digital IP feeds, clean enough that you could read badge numbers if someone got too close. And that crispness made it easier to trust what you saw. At 1:58 a.m., the main grid flickered for half a second, and camera 9 went black, then returned with a wash of pixels, like the feed had swallowed water. Camera 9 watched the long glass corridor that connected Building B to the parking structure. A bright tunnel with motion lights and a dead corner where the hallway turned. When the picture stabilized, there was a figure standing in that dead corner, half in shadow, half in the spill from the motion lights. It wasn't moving, and I didn't get a motion alert. It was simply present in a place the camera rarely needed to show me. I leaned forward, expecting compression artifacts to smear it into nothing. But the outline held shoulders, head, arms down, then the feed stuttered again. The figure vanished, and the corner was empty. I rewound the last minute. On playback, the corner stayed empty the whole time. No figure, no stutter, no wash of pixels. The DVR timeline was clean, like nothing had happened. I stared at the screen long enough for my eyes to sting, and the rational part of my brain latched onto the only explanation it liked: packet loss, interference, some network hiccup that briefly painted a person-shaped artifact into the frame. I logged it as camera 9, intermittent. 10 minutes later, it happened again. Same wash of pixels, same half-second blackout, and the figure was back, closer to the lit portion of the corner. This time the head was angled slightly toward the camera, like it was aware of the lens. I waited for the motion alarm to chirp. Nothing. The system didn't care. Only I cared. The feed stuttered. The figure vanished. And again the playback showed nothing. That's when it stopped feeling like random interference and started feeling like something that knew the difference between live and recorded. I pulled up the camera status panel, checking bitrate and connection quality. And everything looked green. No dropped frames, no errors. I opened the raw stream diagnostics and the timestamps were perfect. The only irregularity was on my eyes and my nerves. I did what you're supposed to do. I called the on-call IT number, left a voicemail, then grabbed my flashlight and walked the corridor physically. The glass tunnel was empty. The motion lights clicked on as I entered, bathing the white floor in sterile brightness. The dead corner was just a corner, two glass walls meeting at a 90-degree turn. A potted plant. A fire extinguisher cabinet. No hiding place. No footsteps. The quiet felt thick enough to press. I went back to the security room and watched camera 9 like it owed me an answer. At 2:27 a.m., the stutter returned. But this time it wasn't camera 9. It was the entire grid. Every feed on the wall shimmered at once. A synchronized ripple like a hand had brushed across the screens. Then everything stabilized except one small window I hadn't opened. A new feed appeared in the bottom row labeled AUX. I didn't have an AUX camera. The feed showed my security room from a ceiling angle. Looking down at my chair and desk, and I felt my stomach drop because the angle was real, stable, and too intimate to be a default. On that AUX feed, I was sitting in my chair, hands on the desk, head tilted slightly, as if listening. In real life, I was standing. I looked down at my own hands, then back at the AUX feed, and watched my recorded hands lift slowly from the desk. The recorded version of me turned his head toward the corner behind the DVR rack. and his shoulders rose as if he was holding his breath. In my real room, the corner behind the rack was dark and empty. The recorded me stared into that darkness for a long time, then nodded once. Small and deliberate, the grid shimmered again, and orcs vanished. Camera 9 returned to normal. I didn't move for a full minute, because I was trying to decide whether I was hallucinating a feed that had never existed. Then the radio on my desk popped with a tiny click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near a microphone, and a calm voice came through on a channel that should have been silent. "Stop rewinding," it said. I didn't answer. The voice didn't need me. "You keep checking the tape to feel safe," it continued. "But the tape is for training." My throat went dry. I checked the radio display and it showed my normal frequency. I keyed the mic anyway and asked if anyone was on. Static hissed. Then the same calm voice, "Watch camera 9." I looked up. The grid flickered. Camera 9 washed into pixels, and when it stabilized, the figure was no longer in the dead corner. It was in the hallway itself. Mid-tunnel. Standing under the motion light. It was close enough now that I could see it wasn't wearing reflective clothing. Wasn't carrying a bag. Wasn't doing the normal things a trespasser does. It was just a person shape with the wrong stillness. Like it had been paused. The motion sensor still didn't trigger. Then, for the first time, the figure moved. But not like a person walking. It shifted forward by a foot, without any intermediate motion. Like frames had been cut out. The grid shimmered again. The figure shifted again. Closer. As if it was stepping through a missing moment. My heart hammered because I understood what I was watching, not a glitch in the feed, but a glitch in time being used like a door. I grabbed the flashlight and ran to the corridor. Because adrenaline makes you believe speed matters. The tunnel was empty. The lights were on. The dead corner was a corner. I was alone with my own breath and the faint hum of air conditioning. When I turned back toward the security room, I saw my reflection in the glass wall. And for a split second, the reflection didn't match my movement. It lagged. Like the reflection was delayed by a fraction of a second. And in that lag, I saw a second shape behind me. Tall and still, occupying the space where there was no space. I spun around. Nothing. I walked back to the security room, shaking. And camera 9 was clean again. The DVR playback was clean too. No figure, no shimmer, just a quiet corridor and the live normal footage. That's when I noticed something new on the screen overlay. A line of text where camera IDs usually sit. It wasn't the system font. It was plain white letters. Too crisp. Sitting above the timestamp like someone had typed it into the video itself. Not a glitch. My stomach dropped. I tried to take a screenshot and the capture tool failed. I tried to export a clip and the export option grayed out. I tried to open the camera settings and the menu flashed briefly into a black terminal window with a single toggle highlighted Enable Stability. Under it, smaller text. Prevent skipping. My hands went numb. The radio clicked again and the voice said, almost gently, "Skipping is how we arrive." The grid shimmered one last time and orcs returned. Ceiling view of my room. This time the recorded me wasn't alone. In the corner behind the DVR rack, a tall figure stood perfectly still, close enough that its shadow touched the recorded me's shoulder. The recorded me reached up and slowly unplugged the radio. In real life, my radio unplugged itself with a soft pop, as if an unseen hand had pulled it. Then the recorded me stood, walked to the security room door, and unlocked it. In the recorded feed, the door swung open into the hallway outside, and the figure stepped forward in a smooth motion that didn't match human walking. More like it was sliding between frames. I backed away from the real door. Hard, slamming, and the handle rattled once. Gentle, like someone testing. The grid shimmered. Orcs vanished, and every camera on the wall turned to the same view, my security room door from the hallway outside. As if the building had decided to watch the entrance with me, the door handle moved again. Not a rattle this time. A clean turn. The latch clicked. The door didn't open. Because I had thrown the deadbolt, a line of text appeared on the monitors in that same plain white font. Good. You learned a lock. Then another line. Locks are for people. Cameras are for us. I didn't finish my shift. I sat with my back against the far wall until sunrise and listened to the building's quiet like it was waiting. When relief came in, he asked why the monitor wall was showing the hallway camera on every feed. I told him the system must have rebooted. He laughed and said, "These feeds never reboot." He leaned closer to the screens and pointed at the corner of the hallway view, where a dark shape stood just out of the camera's main light, occupying the dead corner by the door. "Is that you?" he asked. I looked, and the shape was perfectly still, like it was waiting for me to blink. I told him no. When I checked the DVR later from home, the footage from that night ended at 2:26 a.m. Exactly. Clean cut. No error. The last frame on camera 9 was the empty glass tunnel, and in the reflection of the glass, barely visible, was my own face, staring back with someone else standing behind it. The door that scared me the most wasn't a steel security door or a loading bay gate. It was a cheap, interior office door that shouldn't have been able to lock the way it did. I was on contract at a small city museum doing overnight watch, mostly to satisfy insurance, 1 guard, 1 patrol per hour, and cameras that covered the galleries and back offices. The building was old enough to have beautiful public rooms and ugly employee hallways, and it was laid out like a puzzle. Public spaces connected by narrow service corridors. Storage rooms with no windows. A basement that smelled like damp paper. My supervisor warned me about one thing: the collections office in the back wing was off limits at night because of sensitive artifacts. If the door's closed, it stays closed, he said. He gave me a master key anyway, because rules always come with exceptions. When someone wants to go home, the collections office door was plain wood, with a small frosted window and a brass lever handle, and the only lock on it was a simple sliding bolt on the inside. No keyhole, no electronic latch, nothing you could operate from the hall. The bolt was there for privacy when staff were inventorying pieces, and because it was inside only, it was supposed to be irrelevant to me. At 2:09 a.m., the motion panel chirped for the back wing corridor. I looked at the CCTV grid and saw camera 3, the service hallway feed. The corridor was empty, except for a pool of light near the collections office door. The door was slightly open, maybe an inch, just enough to show a line of darkness inside. That was wrong, because I'd checked it earlier and it had been closed. I watched for movement. Nothing. I waited for a second alert. None came. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the corridor. The museum after hours has a different kind of silence than offices or warehouses. It's curated silence, as if the building is trying to preserve the quiet the way it preserves objects. I reached the collections office door and saw it was closed now. Perfectly shut. No gap. I touched the handle anyway. It didn't budge. Not locked like a keyed lock, but held fast like something inside had latched the bolt. My stomach tightened because I knew what that bolt was. And I knew I couldn't be on the wrong side of it unless someone was inside. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Nothing but my own breath. I stepped back and swept the flashlight beam across the frosted window. No shadow moved behind it. The glass showed only dull, milky light from the corridor. I tried the handle again. Harder. The door didn't move. I radioed to dispatch, even though dispatch was just a board contract call center that logged incidents. I said, "Collections office door appears latched from inside. Requesting guidance." Static answered. Then a faint click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near a mic. And a voice came through that wasn't the call center. It was calm and close, like it was already in the hallway with me. "It's locked," the voice said. I froze. "Who is this?" I asked. Static. Then the voice again. "Check the window." My flashlight beam held on the frosted glass. For a second, the window looked normal. Then, slowly, a darker shape settled behind the glass from the inside. Like someone had stepped close enough to block light, not a clear silhouette. Just a vertical absence in the milky pane. The shape didn't move like a person leaning in. It arrived like a shadow being poured. The radio clicked again, and the voice said, almost pleased, "Good. Now you know." I stepped back, heart hammering, and the shadow behind the frosted glass vanished instantly, like it had never been there. I grabbed the handle one more time, and the door still refused to move. I backed away and forced myself to do what policy demanded: check the cameras. Confirm no one entered. Confirm no breach. Then escalate. In the security room I pulled up. Camera 3 playback from the last 10 minutes. The corridor feed showed the door slightly open for one frame. Then shut. Then nothing. No person entering. No hand pulling it closed. Just a tiny change in position like a cut between moments. I switched to camera 2. The hallway intersection that led into the back wing. Empty. I switched to camera 7. The staff stairwell. Empty. The access control log for the museum's staff entrance showed no entries since 9 p.m. The building insisted it was empty. The door insisted someone was inside. I did a second patrol. Slower. Telling myself it could be a ventilation pressure issue. A warped frame. A stupid mechanical explanation. When I reached the collections office again, the door was cracked open by that same inch. I could see into the dark room now. Just a sliver, a desk edge, a filing cabinet. The pale suggestion of storage boxes stacked. I pushed gently, and the door swung inward a few inches, then stopped dead, as if it had hit a chain. There was no chain. It stopped because the bolt had been slit, and the bolt was now holding against the frame, leaving the door half open like an invitation, with a hand on the other side. My skin crawled. I shone the flashlight through the gap and called out, "Security. Identify yourself." No answer. The air inside smelled like paper and old wood. I widened the gap as far as the bolt allowed, and that was when I saw it, the inside bolt. a simple metal bar across the frame slid into place. I could see the plate. I could see the scratches in the metal. It was engaged. That meant someone had closed the door. Then slid the bolt. Then opened the door again just enough to show me the dog. It was a deliberate gesture. And the building was too quiet for me to pretend otherwise. I stepped back and pulled my phone out to record. Then remembered I'd left it in the security room per policy. My hands shook with the uselessness of doing things correctly. I went back to the security room and watched the corridor feed live. On camera 3, the door was half open exactly as I'd left it. The frosted window was a dull rectangle. No movement. Then the picture stuttered just a shimmer, and for half a second, the feed showed the inside of the collections office from an impossible angle. High and wide. Like a camera had been mounted in the corner of that room. In that half second, I saw a chair placed in the center of the office, facing the door. And behind the chair, in the darkest corner, something tall stood perfectly still. The feed snapped back to the hallway view as if it hadn't happened. I rewound immediately. The DVR showed no stutter, no interior angle, clean corridor, half-open door. Nothing else. My radio clicked again with that fingernail tap. And the calm voice returned. "Stop rewinding," I whispered. "What do you want?" the voice answered without urgency. "Open it." I stared at the door on the live feed. Half open. Bolted. Daring me. "I can't," I said. And the truth of that hit me hard. The voice sounded almost amused. "You can." It said, "You already did." The monitors flickered, and a new small window appeared, labeled Review. It wasn't a DVR menu, I recognized. It was a plain playback window with no controls. Just a timestamp, 2:09 a.m. In that review window, I watched myself walk down the corridor, reach the collections office, step inside through the slightly open door, and slide the bolt from the inside. I watched my own hand do it. Deliberate. Calm. Then I watched myself pull the door open an inch and step back into the hallway, leaving it half open, like a message. My mouth went dry because the footage was clear. Stable. And impossible. In my memory. I never crossed that threshold. In the review, I did it with ease. The review window ended on a still frame of the frosted glass, with a shadow behind it. White text appeared over the still. Simple and clean. Inside lock. Confirmed. My radio tapped once, and the voice said softly, "Now you know how it works." The live feed on camera 3 showed the door handle turn slightly on its own. A small testing movement, and the frosted window darkened as a shape settled behind it again. This time it stayed. I backed away from the monitors and heard a soft metallic scrape from the corridor outside the security room, like a bolt sliding across a frame. The security room door handle rattled once, gentle, like a polite knock. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because moving felt like agreeing. The radio tapped again, and the voice said, calm as a procedure reminder, "Doors that lock from the inside are for keeping people out. You're not out." At sunrise, my relief arrived and found me sitting in the security room with the lights on, staring at the camera, 3 feet. The collections office door was fully closed now. The handle was still. He asked if anything happened. I told him, "Don't open that door if it's half open." He laughed and said it's always shut. I showed him the playback. The DVR had no record of the door ever opening. The access log showed no breach. The building's official story was clean. As I was leaving, I glanced down the back corridor one last time. The collections office door was closed, but on the frosted window, pressed into the milkiness like a fingerprint, it was a darker oval, as if someone had leaned their face against the glass and held it there long enough to leave a mark. When I got to my car, my radio unplugged. Supposed to be dead, crackled once in my bag, and the calm voice said, so close, it felt like breath. Good, you didn't look inside. Then it added, quieter. Next time you will. If you've never worked overnight in a warehouse, you think the fear comes from shadows. It doesn't. It comes from sound. Because sound is proof that something has lungs. And when the building is supposed to be empty, one human noise is enough to turn every camera into a lie. My contract that month was at a refrigerated logistics hub outside the city. A place so big, the ceiling lights looked like a dim constellation, and the aisles ran forever. My post was a glass booth at Dock 2, with 8 CCTV feeds, a motion panel, and a radio to a supervisor who slept at home unless a door got forced. The first 2 nights were uneventful. Just the steady hum of refrigeration units and the occasional bang of metal contracting in the cold. The kind of boredom that makes you start counting your own blinks. On the 3rd night, at 2:06 a.m., I heard a whistle from somewhere inside the warehouse. A clean, casual little tune, like someone killing time. I looked up at the monitors. Every feed showed empty lanes and closed doors. The motion panel was dark. I told myself it was the building. Air pressure. A vent. A belt squeal. Anything mechanical, my tired brain translated into a melody, until the whistle repeated with the same 2 notes sliding up and down like a signal. I keyed my radio and asked about maintenance. No. The supervisor said, nobody's supposed to be inside. Log it and do a walk. So I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the booth. The air hit me like refrigerator breath. My boots echoed too loudly on concrete, and the sound of my own steps made the warehouse feel less empty in a way I didn't like. The whistle came again, and I could place it ahead of me near aisle 7, where the shelves formed a blind canyon. I walked toward it, scanning the floor for footprints in the dust and the corners for a face, trying not to move. Nothing. I reached the mouth of aisle 7 and listened. Silence. Then the whistle. Directly behind me. Soft and playful. Like someone had leaned close and stepped back before I could turn. I spun. Beam slicing across empty space. Nobody. The whistle happened again. Up high. As if it came from the catwalk near the ceiling. I aimed the light upward. Empty railings. Empty grating. Only shadows shaped like bones. My radio crackled with a tiny click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic. And I heard the same 2-note whistle buried in the static. That was the first moment it stopped being only a sound in a building and started feeling like a sound using the building. I went back to the booth and checked the cameras again, forcing myself to be methodical. Everything looked normal. Except on camera 5, the audio meter was pulsing. Faint green bars rising and falling. The warehouse cameras weren't supposed to have audio. The policy said so. And the company cared about lawsuits more than upgrades. The meter rose again. And through my monitor speakers, Speakers I didn't remember turning on. I heard the whistle, cleaner than before, like it was being performed into a microphone right next to the lens. A line of text appeared on the feed overlay where the camera ID should be. It wasn't the system font. It was plain white letters. Listen. I killed the monitor volume. The whistle continued anyway. Now, through the vents above my booth. As if the ductwork had learned the tune, I checked the DVR event log. And for each time I'd heard the whistle, there was a note stamped with the camera number. As if the system had detected audio and tagged it as an incident. The tag name wasn't noise or alert. It was caller. I called the supervisor again. No answer. The radio gave me only that soft tapping and a breath of static. I tried to do the smart thing and stay in the booth. But the longer I listened, the more the whistle felt like it was mapping the building, moving from section to section with a patience that suggested practice. I locked the booth and went out again, walking the main aisle with my head up, announcing myself with every step like I was daring anyone to hide. The whistle answered. Always just ahead. Never urgent. Always casual. Like it belonged. It led me past aisle 7, past the forklift bays, toward the back wall where the warehouse narrowed into a service corridor. Halfway there, the whistle changed slightly. Same, 2 notes, but with a pause between them. And my stomach tightened because I recognized it. It was the exact cadence we used in training to signal all clear when you couldn't use the radio. I hadn't heard anyone use that cadence since the first week I'd started. I'd never whistled it myself on this job. I hadn't needed to. The corridor ended at a metal door marked freezer access. The whistle came from the other side, muffled by insulation, but unmistakable. I put my hand on the handle and felt the cold bite through my glove. Company policy said don't open freezer doors unless you have to. My body said don't open it, because doors are where stories begin. Before I could decide, the whistle stopped. And in the silence, I heard another sound, slow, steady breathing that wasn't mine. I backed away and whispered into my radio that I was at freezer access and hearing someone inside. The radio clicked, and a calm voice came through, close and flat, as if it had been waiting in the channel. Whistled back. It said, "That wasn't a supervisor. That was a test." I didn't whistle. I couldn't. The breathing behind the door shifted into the same 2-note tune. Softer now, as if whoever was inside had decided to do it for me. I turned and walked back toward the booth without running. Halfway down the main aisle, the whistle began again. But it wasn't ahead of me. It was perfectly in sync with my footsteps. Like the sound lived in the space between my heel strikes. On camera 5, I watched my own small figure walking beneath the lights. And the whistle played through the booth speakers again, even though I'd killed the volume. A new overlay line appeared. Good pace. I stopped walking. On the monitor. My figure kept walking for 2 more steps before it stopped. That delay was small, but it was enough to feel like rehearsal. I looked down at my boots, then took 1 careful step forward. On the screen, I stepped first, not by much, just by a fraction that made my skin crawl, like the camera was ahead of time and my body was catching up. Then the whistle came from the corner of the booth, behind the filing cabinet. The dead corner. Every camera angle missed. I didn't turn my head. I watched the monitors instead, because the monitors had become the only place the building admitted anything. Camera 5 showed the main aisle empty now. but in the far corner of the frame, where the shells met shadow. A tall shape stood perfectly still, as if it had been there the whole night, and the whistle had only been the way it told me where not to look. My radio clicked one last time when the calm voice said, almost gently, "Don't stand in corners." Then it added, "Quieter. If you hear whistling, you're already being followed." At 6:00 a.m., the day guard arrived and asked why every light was on. I didn't answer. On camera 5. The audiometer was still pulsing in the silence. And in the DVR event log, the last caller entry was labeled with my employee ID. The day guard whistled while he unlocked the booth, absent-minded. The same two-note cadence. He stopped when he saw my face and said he hadn't meant to. On the monitors, the audiometer spiked anyway, as if the building was answering him in my voice. I handed him my keys and walked out. Everyone thinks the basement is just pipes and storage on night shift. The basement is the part of the building that never learns daylight, and anything that lives down there doesn't have to pretend. I was working security at Parkline Towers, a renovation where residents slept above torn walls and exposed studs while contractors promised it was temporary. My post was the lobby booth with 3 cameras, a heavy key ring, and a checklist that said patrol the basement mechanical level once per shift. On the night it happened, the motion panel tripped for basement zone M at 3:04 a.m., and the camera showed the laundry storage door cracked open, a thin black wedge that hadn't been there earlier. I grabbed my flashlight and took the service stairs down, listening to my own steps echo ahead of me like someone else was walking first. The corridor lights clicked on in sections as I moved, turning the basement into lit boxes separated by darkness. At the laundry door, I pushed it with my glove, and it swung inward smoothly, not stuck, as if someone had opened it and left it waiting. My beam swept shelves and boxes, then landed in the far corner on a neat rectangle of flattened cardboard laid like a mat. On top sat a folded blanket, clean and tucked, like a bed someone had made on purpose. Beside it was a half-full water bottle and a paperback opened face down at the same page, as if the reader had stepped away for a minute and expected to return. The cardboard mat sat in a clean rectangle on the concrete, as if someone swept around it every day. The blanket smelled faintly of detergent, not mold, and that detail bothered me more than the bed itself, because it meant someone was maintaining a routine down there. Next to the bottle was a small pile of things, lined up with nervous precision, a disposable lighter, a roll of black electrical tape, a cheap pair of work gloves, and a pen with my company logo, one I'd lost earlier that week in the lobby. I stared at that pen until my mouth went dry, because it meant the basement wasn't just occupied. It was watching me. My stomach tightened because a bed in a basement isn't paranormal. It means a person has been close enough to learn your route and quiet enough to never trigger a complaint. I backed out and tried my radio. Static. Then a faint click. That familiar fingernail on plastic sound that had started showing up in every job I took. My calls to the supervisor went to voicemail. I went back in anyway. Slow, light, steady, and called out. Security. You can leave now. No trouble. The room stayed silent. The blanket stayed folded. The book stayed open. When I leaned closer, I saw the book wasn't a novel. It was my company's night shift safety procedures handbook. The same bright cover they handed new hires. That shouldn't have been there. I lifted it carefully and found a key card underneath a plain white badge with no name. Just a strip of black tape on the edge and 2 words written in neat white ink. Stay quiet. Inside the doorframe. At eye level. Someone had scratched short vertical lines into the paint. Grouped in 5s, like a tally. They were fresh enough that white plaster showed through. I didn't touch them, but I counted without meaning to 20 lines. Then another 10 below them. As if someone had been measuring nights instead of days. I forced myself to look for the practical, a forced lock. A broken hinge. Any sign of entry. The lock plate was intact. The screws weren't stripped. The door hadn't been kicked. It had simply been used. When I stepped back into the corridor, my flashlight flickered once. A clean blink. And for that blink, the far end of the hallway looked wrong. Deeper than it should. Like the darkness had weight. Then the light steadied, and everything returned to normal concrete and pipes. And I hated how quickly my brain accepted normal again. I set it back down and stepped away. And the laundry door shifted behind me. Not closing. Just narrowing the gap the way a door moves when a hand releases it. I spun and hit the room with my flashlight. Nothing. But the gap was smaller. Whoever was there was close enough to touch the door without being seen. I backed into the corridor and walked toward the stairs without running. Behind me, the motion lights clicked off one by one, even though I was still moving. Like the sensors had decided I didn't count. Halfway to the stairs, I heard a soft sound. Fabric, rubbing, fabric. Like someone standing up from a blanket. I didn't turn. I took the stairs 2 at a time and locked myself in the lobby booth. Basement Zone M stayed red on the panel. I pulled up the basement camera. The corridor was empty, and the laundry door was shut now. Perfectly closed. Then the feed stuttered, and for half a second I saw inside the storage room from an angle that didn't exist on our map. The blanket was pulled back, as if someone had just stood up. A chair sat in the middle of the room facing the door. In the chair, perfectly still, was a person in a dark hoodie wearing my company's reflective vest. Their hood hid their face. Their hands were folded like they were waiting. The feed snapped back to the corridor view. I rewound to capture it. But playback showed only a clean, empty hallway. No stutter. No chair. No person. Back in the lobby booth, I pulled up the keycard access log for the service stairwell door. The one that should show every entry to the basement. The screen showed an access at 302A. M. My badge ID. My name. Perfectly spelled. As if I'd swiped in 2 minutes before the motion panel alerted. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Because I had been sitting in the booth at 302, drinking coffee and watching the lobby camera. I tried to print the log, but the printer status flipped to offline. I tried to screenshot it, and the window minimized itself like a hand had pushed it down. At 411 a.m., the lobby intercom chirped as if someone pressed the call button. The front camera showed nobody outside. The intercom chirped again, and a voice came through. Quiet and calm. Let me back in. I froze, because the voice sounded like mine. Same cadence. Same rasp from too much coffee. I didn't answer. The voice tried again. Polite. It's cold down here. You took my book. On the basement feed. The motion lights began clicking on by themselves in a steady sequence. Advancing toward the stairs, at a pace that matched my patrol speed. The camera never showed a body, only the lights moving. Calm and measured. The voice on the intercom whispered, almost gently, "Don't make me come upstairs at 5:55 a.m." 5 minutes before relief. The laundry door on the basement feed cracked open again. The same thin wedge. A pale hand appeared in the gap. Fingers curling around the edge, holding it like a signal. Then, in the quiet of my lobby booth, I heard fabric rub fabric right behind my chair. Close enough that the air shifted against my neck. I didn't turn. I stared at the monitors until the day guard arrived and asked why my hands were shaking. When the day guard came in, my reflective vest on the hook behind me was gone, and the hook was still swaying slightly, as if someone had just lifted the fabric away. I told him there was someone living in the basement. He laughed and said the basement is sealed at night. Then he pointed at my desk and asked why I had an extra key card with black tape on it. I looked down. The Stay Quiet card was there on my desk, even though I'd left it in the storage room, on the back. In neat white ink were 3 new words: "Your shift now." The mannequin didn't move the first time I saw it. That's the part I always have to say out loud. Because if you tell this story wrong, people assume you're exaggerating. I was on a night patrol contract for a mid-sized furniture and clothing outlet that had gone half empty after a messy bankruptcy. The owner kept the lights on, kept the cameras running, and kept one guard in the building every night because the insurance company demanded human presence. Human presence meant me in a little security office behind the registers. A coffee pot that burned everything, and 12 CCTV feeds that covered the entrances, the stockroom, and the sales floor. The sales floor had mannequins left behind in odd little clusters, some dressed in outdated seasonal outfits, some naked plastic forms with scuffed faces, all of them posed under spotlights, like the store was still pretending it mattered. On my 3rd night, right after 2 a.m., the motion panel chirped for Zone F. Front floor, camera 6 showed the men's section, and in the center of the frame stood a mannequin in a suit. Head tilted slightly, hands relaxed at its sides, exactly where it had been the night before. The weird part was not what I saw. The weird part was what the system claimed. The motion panel was lit bright red, sustained, as if something was pacing. I watched the feed for a full minute. Nothing moved, no shadows, no flicker, just the mannequin and the rows of empty racks. I rewound a few minutes, in playback. The mannequin was still there. Still. 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 The panel stayed lit anyway. I told myself it was a sensor catching air from the HVAC or a loose sign swinging. I grabbed my flashlight and did the patrol like policy demanded. The store after hours is a different kind of empty. It isn't peaceful. It's staged. Like the building is holding its breath to keep the illusion intact. I walked to the men's section, swept the beam over the mannequin's polished shoes. The glossy plastic face, the dead eyes painted too carefully. Nothing. I did a full loop past the changing rooms and back to my office. When I sat down, the motion panel was dark again, like it had only needed me to stand up. Then, at 2:27, Zone F lit again. Same camera, same mannequin, still no visible movement. This time I decided to test it in a way that would either make me feel stupid or make the night feel worse. I took a photo of the monitor with my phone. Just a quick reference shot of the mannequin's stance. The angle of its head. The position of its right hand near the seam of the jacket. Then I watched the live feed without blinking. 30 seconds passed. A minute passed. My eyes started to water. The mannequin did not move. The motion panel stayed lit. I checked camera 5, which covered the same area from a different angle. On camera 5, the mannequin wasn't there. The spot where it should have been was empty carpet. I leaned closer. Sure, I had mixed up the camera numbers, but the signage and the racks matched. Camera 6 showed the mannequin. Camera 5 showed nothing. I toggled between them like a kid flipping a light switch, and my stomach tightened because both feeds were stable. Both showed the same section, and only one admitted the mannequin existed. I told myself it was a DVR desync, a delay, a cached frame, anything technical. I hit the timestamp overlay. Both feeds showed the same time to the second. I rewound camera 6 by 1 minute and watched the mannequin appear the way a file loads one frame empty. The next frame occupied. No walking in. No shift. Just present. Then I rewound camera 5. The area stayed empty the entire time. Like the mannequin had never been moved there in any timeline. My radio on the desk gave a tiny click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic. And a calm voice came through on a channel that shouldn't have carried anything. Don't trust the wide angle, it said. I froze. Who is this? I asked. And my own voice sounded wrong in the quiet store. Static answered. Then the same calm voice. Closer. As if it were inside the room with me. Count the mannequins. I didn't want to, but my eyes did it anyway, because my brain loves tasks when it's scared. I counted the groups on the monitors 3 by the front window, 2 near the clearance racks, 4 in the women's section, 1 in the men's section. Then I stood up and counted physically from where I sat. Looking out past the registers, I could see the front window mannequins, the clearance mannequins, the women's cluster. I could not see the men's mannequin from my office, but I knew it was there. I checked the inventory sheet in the binder. The dumb, outdated list the store kept for assets. It said there were 9 mannequins total, on camera. I could only account for 8, besides the one in men's. That made 9. Fine. Normal. Then zone F lit again. And on camera 6, the men's mannequin was closer to the camera by about 2 feet. The suit fabric didn't ripple. The posture didn't change. It simply occupied a new position as if someone had picked it up and set it down between frames. My skin prickled. I grabbed my flashlight and walked fast to the men's section. Not running, but fast enough that my breath sounded too loud in the empty store. The mannequin was standing exactly where camera 6 now showed it, closer to the aisle. Head still tilted, hands still relaxed. I stared at the carpet and saw no drag marks. No scuffs? No evidence it had been moved. I put my hands on its shoulders, expecting it to feel like cold plastic. And it did. But there was a faint warmth at the surface, like it had been touched recently. I stepped back. The store lights hummed. My flashlight beam caught the mannequin's face. And for a second, the painted eyes looked wet, like the gloss had pooled. I told myself it was reflection. I did the professional thing and set the mannequin back into what I thought was a safer position, turning it slightly so it faced the wall instead of the camera. Like denying the lens could deny the problem, I returned to the office with my pulse in my throat. On camera 6. The mannequin was still facing the camera, had tilted the original way. As if my physical adjustment hadn't happened, I stared, confused. Then checked. Camera 5. On camera 5. The area was still empty. My phone buzzed with a notification from my own camera roll. The photo I'd taken earlier of the monitor had changed. In the photo, the mannequin wasn't in the men's section at all. It was in my office, standing behind my chair in the corner where the filing cabinet met the wall. The suit jacket catching the faint glow of the monitor light. My throat closed. I spun around. The corner was empty. I looked back at the photo, and the mannequin's head in the image was tilted toward me, as if it had been watching when I took the picture. My hands shook as I swiped to the next photo in my gallery. A photo I had not taken. It was a still frame from a ceiling angle inside my office, showing me seated at the desk, staring at the monitors, and behind me, in the corner, the mannequin in the suit stood perfectly still. In the bottom of that still was a white overlay in plain letters. Not the store system font. Subject looks away. I didn't move for a full 10 seconds because my body knew what the caption meant. It meant the moment I turned my head, the thing would be allowed to occupy the space behind me. The radio clicked again, and the calm voice said, almost like a reminder you'd give a new hire, "Mannequins are for practicing posture." I whispered, "Stop." And my own voice sounded like a request for permission. The voice answered, soft and pleased. "We are practicing you." The motion panel lit every zone at once, as if the whole store was suddenly full of movement. And on the monitor wall, each feed cut to a new camera angle I'd never seen in the system. All of them ceiling corner views, pointed at corners, the corner behind the registers, the corner by the front doors, the corner in the stockroom, the corner in the men's section. In every single corner, a mannequin stood perfectly still. Not 9, not 12, too many. Suits, dresses, naked plastic forms, all angled toward their nearest camera, like they understood the assignment. In the center of the wall, a small window appeared, labeled "Office." It was the ceiling angle of my own security room again. And in the corner behind my chair stood the suit mannequin, closer than in the photo. Close enough that its shadow touched the back of my neck on the screen. The door handle to my office rattled once. Gentle, like someone testing if I'd locked it. I didn't check. I didn't breathe right. I stared at the monitors until my eyes burned, because looking felt like the only thing that kept the corners honest. At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before relief, every feed snapped back to normal layouts. The store looked empty again, harmless again, staged again. Zone lights went dark. My phone gallery returned to normal, except the last extra photo stayed the ceiling view of my office with the mannequin behind me, and beneath it the same plain white words, "Good posture." When the day manager arrived, he laughed and asked why I looked sick. I told him the sensors were faulty. He said the sensors were new. Then he gestured toward the men's section and said, casual as a joke, "By the way, why is the suit mannequin facing the wall? We always keep it facing the aisle." I looked. and from the office doorway I could see it clearly. The mannequin was facing the aisle, head tilted toward the cameras, hands relaxed. Exactly how it had started. My adjustment had never existed in the store's version of the night, only in mine. The night I saw the words, "Don't look up," I didn't think it was paranormal at first. I thought it was a joke someone left for the next shift. The kind of graffiti you find in stairwells when contractors get bored. I was guarding a half-finished residential high-rise, where the bottom floors were still raw concrete, and the top floors had tenants who complained if you breathed too loud. The developer kept a single guard on overnight to patrol and answer calls, and the biggest rule on the sheet was simple: do not let anyone into the building after midnight without a key fob. Most nights were dull. You walk the same route, check the same doors, listen to the same building noises, and you start to think you can predict every creak. At 144 a.m., the motion panel tripped for stairwell B, mid-level. The camera showed the stair landing on floor. 9 concrete walls, metal handrail, a door to the corridor, and a blind overhead corner where the stairwell turned upward. The landing looked empty. The motion alert repeated anyway, 3 times in a row, as if something was moving just out of frame. I grabbed my flashlight and went up, taking the service elevator to floor 8 and climbing 1 flight to keep my steps quieter. The stairwell smelled like wet cement and metal. My light swept the landing. Empty. Then I saw it on the wall above the handrail, written in thick black marker across the raw concrete. "Don't look up." The letters were fresh, dark, confident. My first thought was that a worker had written it to mess with someone. My second thought was that it was aimed at me specifically, because it was exactly where my patrol route forced my eyes to pass. I told myself not to play along, not to let a stupid sentence control my body, so I kept my flashlight beam low and walked past it like it was nothing. Halfway up to floor 10, my radio clicked with that faint fingernail tap on plastic, and a calm voice came through, close and flat. "Good." I froze. "Who is this?" I asked. "Static," answered then the voice again. "You didn't look up." My throat went dry, because that meant someone was watching, and not through the stairwell camera, because the camera angle couldn't see my face when I was climbing. I stepped back down to the floor 9 landing, and stared at the writing again. It wasn't sloppy contractor humor. The strokes were too even, too deliberate, like a printed warning. I raised my flashlight slowly, not at the ceiling, just at the letters, and saw a detail that made my stomach tighten. The marker had bled slightly into the concrete pores, and beneath the fresh ink were faint outlines of older writing, the same phrase repeated in lighter ghosts of black, as if the warning had been written, scrubbed, and written again over months. I forced myself to check the ceiling corner anyway, because refusing a warning is still obeying it. The beam climbed the wall and hit the overhead corner, where the concrete met the underside of the next flight. The corner looked normal. Dust. A bolt head. A seam line. Then my light flickered once, a clean blink, and in that blink, the corner looked deeper, wrong, like the darkness had thickness. I felt a cold prick on the back of my neck, like someone's breath, and my instinct screamed at me to tilt my head. I didn't. I lowered my light and stepped away, and the motion panel on my belt unit chirped again as if pleased. Back in the lobby booth, I pulled up the stairwell B feed and rewound to see who had written the message. The playback showed the landing wall clean, no writing at all, smooth concrete. I scrubbed forward and backward. Still nothing. Live. Feed. The words existed. Playback the wall was blank. That was the exact kind of split that makes your brain try to blame technology, because technology is safer than whatever else it implies. I grabbed my phone to take a picture of the monitor so I could prove to myself the writing wasn't in my head. The camera app opened, showed the landing through the screen, and the words were there. I snapped the photo. When I looked at it in my gallery, the wall was blank. My stomach dropped. I tried again 3 times. Each time live view showed "Don't look up." Each saved photo showed clean concrete. It wasn't that the words weren't there. It was that the words refused to be kept. The radio clicked again, that patient tap, and the calm voice said, "No souvenirs." I sat back, hard in my chair, heart punching. The building was training me again. You can see it, but you can't store it, so your only proof is your reaction. At 2:33 a.m., the motion panel lit for stairwell B, again, this time higher, floor 12, landing. I didn't want to go back, but the pattern of alerts had already dragged my body into compliance. I took the elevator to floor 11 and climbed. On the floor 12 landing, the phrase was written again, bigger, now higher on the wall, so it would be in your line of sight when you lifted your head naturally while climbing. "Don't look up." Under it, in smaller letters, a second sentence had been added. "You looked last time." My mouth went dry because I hadn't looked up last time. Not fully, not the way the warning implied, unless the warning meant something else. Unless looking up wasn't about the ceiling. Unless it was about the camera above. I glanced at the stairwell camera dome mounted in the corner and felt my stomach tighten. The dome was angled slightly lower than before, as if it had been adjusted to capture more of the landing. I shone my flashlight at it, and the dome reflected my beam back like an eye. My radio clicked, and the calm voice whispered, "Not that." The whisper sounded amused, like I'd guessed wrong in a game. I backed away and kept my light low, forcing myself to treat the ceiling as irrelevant. That's when I saw something else on the landing. Faint scuff marks on the concrete floor near the wall, as if something heavy had been dragged. Not across the whole landing, just into the corner under the next flight. The scuffs weren't from boots. They were broad, smeared like fabric or skin. My breathing got shallow. I wanted to leave, but the stairwell door behind me clicked, softly. A gentle latch sound, and when I tried the handle, it didn't move. It wasn't keyed locked. It was held like something on the other side had pressed it shut. My throat tightened. I told myself it could be pressure, a warped frame. Then the writing on the wall changed while I watched. The letters didn't crawl or drip like a horror movie. They simply updated between blinks the way a digital sign updates when you look away. "Don't look up" became "don't look down." The radio clicked once. The calm voice said, "Better." I looked down against my will, and the beam of my flashlight caught a small dark shape on the concrete between my boots. A strip of black electrical tape freshly placed with 3 words, written in neat white ink. "Your turn. Now." The moment my eyes settled on it, the ceiling above me made a soft sound. Not a creak, but a slow shifting scrape, like weight moving across concrete. My skin went cold. I raised my flashlight without lifting my head, angling the beam upward along the wall. Trying to see the corner with peripheral vision like that would cheat the rule. The light caught the underside of the next flight and illuminated something that wasn't dust. It was a handprint smeared dark across the concrete fingers, long and pressed hard as if something had been hanging there. Then another handprint beside it. Then, as my beam climbed a third mark that looked like a footprint where no one could stand, my chest tightened because those marks suggested a person had been upside down above me, moving on the ceiling the way you move on a floor. I didn't look up fully. I didn't have to. The air changed colder, heavier, and I heard the smallest sound of fabric rubbing against concrete directly above my head. The radio clicked, and the calm voice whispered almost gently, "Too late." The stairwell camera feed on my belt unit flickered to life on a small screen I hadn't used before, showing a ceiling corner view of the landing. In that feed, I was standing below flashlight beam trembling, and above me in the corner where the stairwell turned, a dark shape clung to the ceiling perfectly still, head angled down toward my skull. It didn't drop. It didn't move. It simply occupied the space where gravity should have ruled. I forced my eyes to stay on the tiny screen instead of the ceiling itself, because watching through a lens felt safer than watching directly. The shape on the screen lifted one arm slowly, not reaching for me, reaching for the wall, and traced a single finger along the concrete, leaving behind fresh black letters as if the ceiling itself were a whiteboard. On the wall above the landing, the phrase appeared in real time, "Don't look up." My knees went weak. The stairwell door behind me clicked again, a soft release, and the handle moved freely, as if the building had decided the test was complete. I didn't run. I walked down fast, eyes on the steps, refusing to give the ceiling the satisfaction of my full gaze. In the lobby booth, I rewound the Stairwell B tape. The wall was clean. No writing. No marks. The landing was empty. But the motion event log showed one entry at 234A. Labeled not motion detected, but subject complied. I sat there until sunrise, staring at that line. When the day guard arrived, he asked why my flashlight was on the desk with black marker on it, the cap off. I looked down. My flashlight was clean when I left the booth. Now smeared around the grip like someone had held it with wet ink, were my own fingerprints in black. On the underside of the flashlight, taped neatly where your palm rests, was a strip of black electrical tape with 3 words written in white. You looked up. If you ever think a hospital morgue is only scary because of what's inside the drawers, you haven't worked the overnight security shift, when the building is quiet enough to hear a keycard reader breathe. My contract at St. Aveline was simple on paper: 1 guard, assigned to the service level from midnight to 6 a.m. Monitor the camera feeds, respond to motion alerts, and make 1 physical check of the morgue corridor, because the administrators didn't like the word unattended. The morgue itself wasn't a horror movie basement. It was clean, bright, clinical, a short hallway off the pathology wing, with 2 heavy doors, a keypad, and a cooler room beyond it, with stainless drawers lined up like filing cabinets. My post was a cramped security nook outside the service elevator, with 4 monitors and a radio to the main desk upstairs. The nurse on nights warned me not to wander. If that door's closed, it stays closed, she said, meaning the cooler room. Then she added like it was just policy, and don't answer the phone down there after 2 a.m. I laughed because that sounded like superstition dressed up as advice. She didn't laugh back. The first 2 hours were nothing. Laundry carts rolling past a lab, tech moving fast with a clipboard, the occasional soft beep of a refrigerator alarm somewhere deeper in the building. At 2:07 a.m., the motion panel lit up for more corridor, and my eyes jumped to camera 4, the one aimed straight down that short hall at the cooler door. The hall lights were on, the floor shined, and the corridor looked empty, but the motion alert stayed solid red, as if something was moving continuously in the camera's blind corner near the ceiling. I watched for a full minute. No shadow crossed. No figure entered. The alert didn't drop. Then the cooler door handle moved, not a full turn, just a small test, as if a hand had touched it and released. The door didn't open. The alert stayed red. I keyed my radio to the main desk and said, "Service level motion at Morgue corridor, I'm checking." The desk replied with a bored acknowledgement. I grabbed my flashlight, even though the corridor was bright, because a flashlight is a way of pretending you're in control, and I walked down the hall listening for any sound that would make the alert make sense. The cooler door was closed. The keypad was dark. The stainless surfaces reflected my uniform and my face in warped slices. I checked the corners, checked the supply closet, checked the second door that led to pathology storage. Everything was shut. Everything smelled like disinfectant and cold air. The motion panel on my belt unit stayed red anyway, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. I went back to my nook and watched camera 4 again. The corridor was empty. The alert dropped the moment I sat down. 2 minutes later, it lit again. Same corridor, same camera, same empty hall. That's the part that trains you how perfectly it times itself to your body, how it waits until you settle to make you stand. At 219, the landline in my nook rang. The phone was only for facilities calls, and nobody called it that late unless something had broken. I looked at the caller ID. It didn't show a number. It showed a label, Morgue. I stared at it, remembering the nurse's warning. I didn't answer. It rang again. Then a third time, each ring identical, polite, patient. On the third ring, the line clicked by itself, as if someone had lifted the receiver on the other end, and I heard breathing steady close, followed by the faint sound of a fingernail tapping plastic, keeping time. I froze, with my hand hovering over the receiver. Then through the line, a calm voice said drawer 4. My throat went dry. "Who is this?" I asked, and my voice sounded too loud for the room. Static answered. Then the same calm voice closer than it should have been. Drawer 4 is open. I looked at camera 4. The corridor was empty. The cooler door was closed. The motion alert was dark. The phone line stayed open, breathing steady, waiting. I told myself it was a prank by a bored staffer. I told myself hospitals are full of dark humor and tired people. I told myself not to go. Then my monitor grid flickered for a half second, and a new small window appeared on the bottom row labeled Cooler Cam. We didn't have a cooler camera. Nobody had mentioned one, but the feed was stable and bright, showing the inside of the cooler room. Stainless drawers stacked in 2 columns, the pale reflection of overhead lights, the floor marked with yellow lines. In the left column, 4th from the top, one drawer was pulled out by a few inches as if someone had forgotten to push it in. My stomach tightened because the cooler room door was supposed to be locked and the drawers didn't move on their own. The phone voice breathed once, then said, "Close it." I didn't move. I watched the cooler cam feed instead, trying to find the trick. A hand, a shadow, a person reflected in the steel. Nothing. Just the drawer slightly open, silent, and wrong. I forced myself to do the professional thing. I called the main desk and asked if anyone was down on service level near the morgue. They said no, only housekeeping on floor 3. I asked if pathology had anyone working. They said pathology was closed. The landline in my nook made a soft click, like a tongue, sound impatient, and the calm voice returned. "You're wasting time." I grabbed my flashlight and keys and walked back down the corridor, heart punching as if it could outrun logic. The cooler door keypad was dark. I tapped it. No light. I tried the handle. Locked. I shone my flashlight at the seam of the door. No gap. No sign of tampering. The motion panel stayed quiet, like it was waiting for me to admit defeat. I went back to the nook and stared at the cooler cam feed. Drawer 4 was still open. The phone line was still breathing. I whispered, "How is that camera on?" The calm voice answered without emotion. "You like proof." The words hit me harder than a threat because they sounded like my own habit being repeated back to me. I did the only thing that felt like a real boundary. I reached over and unplugged the landline from the wall. The breathing stopped, instantly. The tapping stopped. For 1 second the room felt normal. Then my radio popped with a tiny click, and that same tapping sound moved to the radio speaker, as if the noise had simply chosen a different device. A calm voice came through on my channel flat and close. Unplugging isn't closing. I stood up so fast my chair squealed and every monitor on my wall flickered at once. The cooler cam feed expanded to full screen on its own. Drawer 4 slid out another inch slow and deliberate, and I felt my skin go cold because there was intention in the movement. Then, in the reflection of the drawer face, I saw a shape behind the camera's position, tall and still too dark to be a person in a room that bright. The shape didn't move. It simply occupied the reflection, the way a stain occupies fabric. White text appeared on the bottom of the feed in plain letters that weren't hospital overlay. Subject requested proof. Beneath it, a second line, proof provided. I backed away from the monitors, and my flashlight beam shook across the walls like a nervous animal. The radio voice said almost gently, "Close it now." I whispered, "I can't," and the voice replied, "You can." The screen cut not to the cooler, but to a ceiling corner view of the morgue corridor itself, a camera angle higher than camera 4, aimed at the cooler door and the stretch of hall in front of it. In that feed, I was standing at the cooler door with my flashlight, exactly as I had been minutes ago, and I watched myself on the screen reach into my pocket, pull out a keycard, swipe it, and open the cooler door. I did not have a cooler keycard. I watched myself step inside, walk to drawer 4, and push it shut with one smooth motion like I'd done it 1,000 times. Then the figure appeared in the corner behind my recorded body, tall, perfectly still, its outline swallowed by the stainless reflections. The recorded me didn't turn. He simply nodded once, small and deliberate like agreement. The feed cut back to the present. I was still in my nook. The cooler door down the hall was still locked, and on the cooler cam, feed drawer 4 was now closed. My mouth went dry, because the drawer had complied without my body ever touching it. White text appeared over the cooler feed again, drawer closed. Then good response time. My radio clicked with that fingernail tap, and the calm voice said, "Now, return the tag." I didn't understand until I looked down at my desk and saw a paper toe tag, lying there, clean and new as if it had just come out of a printer. The tag had no patient name. It had my employee number printed in black, perfectly centered. The room felt suddenly too quiet, like the hospital itself was listening. I picked the tag up with 2 fingers. It was cold. On the back, in neat handwriting that matched none of the hospital forms, were 3 words. "You are here." At 5:58 a.m., the day supervisor arrived and asked if anything happened overnight. I told him the motion sensor was acting up. He shrugged and said those sensors are sensitive, near refrigeration. Then he frowned at my desk and asked why I had morgue tags in my security note. I looked down. The tag was gone. In its place was a strip of black electrical tape stuck to the desk edge, where your wrist rests, with 2 words, written in thin white ink, "Drawer 4." A shopping mall after midnight is a different kind of empty because it isn't abandoned, it's paused. Like the whole building is holding its breath until morning. Shoppers give it permission to move again. I took the overnight guard gig at Lakeshore Mall because it paid better than warehouses, and the post sounded easy lockup after closing monitor. CCTV do scheduled patrols and respond to alarms. The mall was huge, with long tiled corridors, skylights that turned into dark mirrors at night, and stores sealed behind metal grates like cages. My post was the security office behind guest services, a room with a monitor wall, a radio and a PA microphone that was only supposed to be used for emergencies. The closing manager walked me through the routine: confirm all exterior doors, arm the motion zones, check the food court, then sit tight. "If you hear music," he said, "it's just a timer glitch in one of the stores. Don't chase it." He tried to sound casual. He didn't meet my eyes. At 1238 a.m., the food court motion zone triggered. Camera 11 showed the food court seating under dim security lights, tables wiped clean, chairs stacked to the fountain off. In the far corner by the dark arcade entrance, a single chair was on the floor, not stacked, facing the camera like someone had placed it as a joke. I rewound a minute. In playback, the chair was stacked. Live feed. It was alone. My stomach tightened at the split, but I told myself it was camera delay and logged it. I did the patrol anyway because you don't get paid to trust your feelings. The food court was empty when I arrived. Every chair was stacked. The floor was clean. The air smelled faintly of fryer oil and cleaning solution. The arcade entrance was shut behind a roll-down gate. No lone chair. I walked back toward guest services and forced myself not to look into the store grates because glass and darkness make reflections that feel like faces if you're tired. When I got back to the office, camera 11 showed the lone chair again, now closer to the camera by a few feet, still facing forward. The motion zone stayed lit, red, steady, as if something was moving continuously in a frame where nothing moved. Then at 1:06 a.m., the mall's background music turned on. Not loudly, just a low, tinny melody bleeding through ceiling speakers, the kind of upbeat playlist malls use to make people spend more. Hearing it at night felt wrong, like laughter in an empty room. I checked the system panel. The music schedule was off. I checked the PA controls. Everything was in standby. The music continued anyway, and over it, faint but clear, I heard a single soft click, like a fingernail tapping plastic, keeping time. My radio popped with a burst of static, and a calm voice came through on my channel too close to be from dispatch. "Don't chase the music," it said. I froze. "Who is this?" I asked. Static answered, then the calm voice again. "You're alone. That's why it's playing." My throat went dry. The monitor grid flickered, and for a half second, a new feed appeared, labeled Atrium Cam, showing the main atrium from a ceiling angle I didn't recognize, looking down on the fountain and the central seating area. The mall should have been empty. On that feed, dozens of dark shapes sat perfectly still, in chairs arranged in neat rows, all facing the fountain. like an audience. The feed snapped back to normal. I rewound. Playback showed an empty atrium. The music kept playing. At 122 a.m., the escalator in the atrium turned on by itself. I heard the mechanical whir, even from behind the office walls, a low grinding that made them all feel awake. Camera 2 atrium wide showed the escalator moving upward with no one on its steps turning like a tongue. At the top landing, just out of the brightest light, a dark shape stood still in the corner, so still the camera compression made it look like part of the wall. I watched for motion alerts. Nothing. The system didn't register it as movement. Then the shape shifted forward by a foot, without any visible walk, like frames had been cut. My skin prickled. I grabbed my flashlight and went out, moving fast but not running, because running in a mall makes you sound like prey. The atrium lights were dim. The escalator was moving empty. The fountain was off. The top landing was too far to see clearly, but I could feel the height above me like pressure. The music continued soft and cheerful, and that contrast made my stomach twist. I walked to the escalator base and looked up without lifting my head fully, using my eyes the way you do when you don't want to admit fear. The corner at the top looked empty. The camera had shown a shape. My eyes saw nothing. I forced myself up the escalator anyway, flashlight beam trembling on the moving steps. Halfway up, the music cut out cleanly, and in the sudden quiet I heard a new sound, soft shuffling, like shoes on tile. Not below me, not above me, beside me. The escalator had glass sides, and in the glass reflection, I saw a second figure rising in sync with me on an adjacent escalator that wasn't moving. The reflection showed shoulders, a head, a body where there was no body. I whipped my light sideways. Empty glass, empty air. The reflection still showed someone there perfectly aligned with me, like a partner. The radio in my pocket made that fingernail tap again, and the calm voice whispered, "Don't look directly." I reached the top landing and stepped off, heart hammering. The corner the camera had shown was empty, but on the tiled floor near the wall, someone had placed a single shopping bag, upright, brand new glossy handles standing like ears. The bag was from a store that had closed months ago. I stared at it and felt my throat tighten, because it meant someone was either inside the mall with access, or the mall was staging props for me. I didn't touch it. I backed away and walked toward the corridor leading to the old store wing. As I did, the overhead lights ahead of me clicked on in a steady sequence, one section at a time, advancing away from me at a pace that matched a calm walk. It wasn't a sensor responding to my movement. It was lights, moving like footsteps, guiding me toward the closed wing. The radio tapped again, and the calm voice said, "Patrol route." My stomach dropped because the mall had a known patrol route printed in the binder in my office, and I realized the building could follow it without me. I turned and walked back toward the atrium, refusing to chase the lights. On camera 2, visible on the small screen of my belt unit, I watched myself from above, returning across the landing, and behind me, 3 paces back, a dark shape moved with the same cadence, never catching up, never falling behind. I spun around. Nothing. I ran my flashlight along the wall corners anyway, because corners had become the place reality liked to hide its edits. At the far end of the landing, near a shuttered jewelry store, the metal grate trembled as if someone had pressed it gently and released. Not forced. Tested. Then the PA speaker above me crackled, and without me touching the microphone, a voice filled the empty mall, smooth and cheerful. The exact tone of a retail announcement. "Attention shoppers," it said. "The mall is now closed." I froze, because the voice sounded like me. Same cadence, same rasp from too much coffee. The announcement repeated slightly slower. "The mall is now closed. Please proceed to the nearest exit." The escalator below me stopped mid-step. The lights dimmed, one shade darker. In that quiet, I heard soft tapping again like a fingernail on plastic near the PA system. I backed down the stairs this time, refusing the escalator, and locked myself in the security office. On the monitor wall, every feed cut at once to the same view, the atrium seating area now arranged in neat rows, like a small theater. The chairs were empty in the feed, but each chair seat had a dark oval on it, as if someone had just stood up, fabric warmed, leaving a shadow of presence. White text appeared over the atrium feed in plain letters that weren't the mall overlay. Subject announced closure. Beneath it, closure denied. My hands went numb. I tried to call the overnight supervisor. The line rang and rang. Then the call connected, and all I heard was breathing and that patient tapping, as if someone had picked up just to remind me they could. The calm voice returned on the radio, almost kind. You wanted to be alone in a morgue. Now you are. At 5:57 a.m., 3 minutes before the opening crew arrived, the background music turned back on by itself, bright and cheerful, and the monitor wall snapped back to normal feeds empty atrium, still chairs, quiet corridors. The lone shopping bag at the top landing was gone. The event log showed one entry at 1:24 a.m., labeled not motion detected, but subject followed lights, even though I had turned away. When the morning manager arrived, he asked why the PA mic was warm to the touch, like it had been used. I told him I never touched it. He smiled like I was kidding then, said casual. By the way, we pulled last night's footage. Funny thing, on the atrium cam, it looks like you were walking around with a customer behind you. I asked him to show me. The playback showed me crossing the landing alone. No follower. Clean tape. He shrugged and said, must have been a reflection. As he walked away, the office printer behind me unplugged, clicked once, and spit out a single receipt-length strip of paper. On it, in plain black letters, was one line, "Attention shoppers." Under it, a second line, "We never left." If you ever take a night shift guarding a construction site, and you tell yourself the only thing you have to worry about is theft, you are setting yourself up for the kind of fear that doesn't come from shadows. It comes from knowing someone has been living in your blind spots long enough to learn. Your routine. My contract was at a half-built mixed-use tower, all exposed concrete, temporary plywood doors, and scaffolding that creaked in the wind like it was breathing. The developer wanted a single overnight guard because copper wire and tools kept disappearing, so they gave me a heated trailer at the gate, a radio, and a set of cameras that covered the perimeter and the main interior stairwell. The site was supposed to be sealed after the crew left padlocks on the gates, temporary alarms on the storage containers, and one rule printed in the binder in big letters: do not enter the upper floors alone. Most nights, I never did. I watched the screens, did a perimeter walk, and listened to the city hum in the distance. On my fourth night, at 1:32 in the morning, the motion alert triggered in the interior stairwell, camera 3. The feed showed the concrete stairs rising into darkness, with a landing half lit by a work lamp. The landing looked empty, but the motion alert stayed on as if someone was moving just out of frame above the camera's angle. I watched for a full minute. No footsteps, no shadow, just the steady grain of the night vision. Then something small happened that made my stomach tighten. A plastic grocery bag drifted into view at the top edge of the landing, not blown like wind, but nudged, as if someone had shifted their foot and brushed it. The bag stopped in the corner, and the motion alert went dark. I grabbed my flashlight and did what the binder demanded. I checked the stairwell entrance from the first floor, keeping my hand on the radio like it was a weapon. The stairwell door was a temporary steel slab with a hasp and padlock. The padlock was still intact. The chain was still tight. Nobody had entered. I told myself the camera must have picked up a vibration. I told myself the bag must have been there already. But when I went back to the trailer and looked at camera 3 again, the bag was not only there, it was neatly tucked into the landing corner like it had been placed. The way it sat was wrong. Loose bags don't sit like that on raw concrete unless someone folds the handles down. At 2:08, the motion alert triggered again, same landing. This time, I saw more than a bag. On the landing beside the bag, a hard hat sat upside down. It was not one of ours. It was old, scuffed, and it had a strip of black electrical tape on the rim. The tape looked fresh. I zoomed in until the pixels broke, and I could just make out faint white writing on the tape. 2 words: stay quiet. My throat went dry because I had seen those words before in other jobs, like they traveled from site to site ahead of me. I keyed the radio and called my supervisor. No answer. The radio gave me only static and a soft click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the microphone. Then a calm voice came through on my channel, too close to be from a distant unit. "You're late," it said. I froze. "Who is this?" I asked. Static, then the calm voice again. "Patrol." My stomach tightened because the binder had a patrol route and the stairwell was not on it. The voice didn't care about the binder. At 219 camera 6, the exterior camera pointed at the tool container roll flickered. For half a second, the feed changed to an angle I didn't recognize, a high interior view of the container corridor, like a camera inside the site, looking down at a narrow passage between stacked materials. In that half second, I saw a sleeping setup, flattened cardboard, a folded blanket, a water bottle, and a line of items arranged too neatly to be trashed. Then the feed snapped back to normal exterior view, empty containers, locked doors. I rewound immediately. Playback showed nothing but the exterior view. No interior angle. No sleeping setup. The site was doing the same trick I had learned to hate: show it live, erase it on tape. I took my phone out to record the monitor, and the moment the camera app opened, the screen on my phone went black and displayed one sentence in plain white letters: "No souvenirs." My mouth went dry. I closed the app. The phone returned to normal. The radio tapped again. The calm voice said, "Upper floors." The binder said, "Do not enter alone." My body said the worst thing you can do at night is disobey a voice that already knows where you are. So I compromised the way guards always do. I didn't go to the upper floors. I went to the lower stairwell door, the one chained from the inside of the site, and I listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, I heard a faint sound of fabric rubbing against concrete, like someone shifting weight on a landing. I backed away and shone my flashlight through the stairwell window. The landing was empty. The hard hat and the bag were not visible from there. I went back to the trailer and watched camera 3. The landing on the feed showed the bag, the hard hat, and now a rolled sleeping mat that had not been there a minute ago. I stared at it, hands numb, and that's when the figure appeared. Not walking into frame, not stepping down the stairs, just present at the top of the landing, half hidden by the upper flight. Tall, still, hood up, no visible face. It stood there facing down toward the camera as if it knew the lens was my only eye. The motion alert did not trigger. The system didn't call it movement. It only called it presence after I reacted. My chair squeaked as I leaned in, and the motion panel lit for the trailer corridor outside my door, not the stairwell. I looked at the exterior camera by the trailer. The gravel path was empty. The gate was shut. The night outside was normal. My trailer door handle rattled once gentle, like a polite test. The radio tapped in perfect time with the rattle. The calm voice said, "Open." I did not. I locked the deadbolt and backed away from the door until my shoulders hit the wall. On camera 3, the stairwell figure remained still. Then, it shifted forward by a foot, without any intermediate motion like frames were missing. It was now lower on the upper flight, closer to the landing. The hard hat on the landing rotated slightly, just a few degrees, as if a hand had nudged it. The strip of black tape flashed in the work light. "Stay quiet." I whispered to myself that I was dealing with a squatter who had found a way to access cameras and mess with feeds. That explanation was terrifying, but still human, still solvable. So I did the human thing. I called the police non-emergency number from my personal phone. The line rang. No connection. The screen displayed a single word, typed like a caption. "Later." The call ended. My skin went cold. The trailer door handle rattled again, this time a clean turn to the stop, as if someone had tried to open and found the bolt. The calm voice on the radio said softly, "Good luck." Then it added, "Locks are for tools." The figure on camera 3 moved again, not walking, just arriving, one step lower. It was now on the landing, standing beside the hard hat, and the way it stood made the landing feel smaller, like the concrete itself had given up space. The figure lowered its head as if it were looking at the hard hat, then lifted its head toward the camera, toward me. White text appeared on the feed, not in the camera overlay font, but in plain letters, like someone typed it onto the video itself. Subject watches. Under it, squatter, Confirmed. My stomach dropped because it named the thing in a way that felt like a joke. If it was a squatter, it was the wrong kind. The figure raised one hand slowly and pressed its palm to the stairwell wall, and in the work light I saw a dark smear appear on the concrete. Not paint, not dust, something wet enough to leave a mark. The mark spread into 3 short strokes, then 2, then a single line like someone writing with a finger. The strokes formed a symbol, then a word. I couldn't read it from the angle, but I didn't need to. The radio tapped once, and the calm voice whispered, "Come see." My trailer lights flickered once, a clean blink, and when they steadied, the monitor wall had changed. Every camera feed was now the same view, a ceiling corner angle inside my trailer looking down at my chair and desk. I did not have a camera in the trailer. On the screen I was sitting in my chair, hands on the desk, even though in real life I was standing. The recorded version of me turned slowly, as if listening to something behind him. In the corner by the heater vent, a tall shape stood perfectly still, close enough that its darkness touched the edge of the recorded desk. The recorded me nodded once, small and deliberate. The real me could not move. My door handle turned again, and this time the bolt did not hold. The deadbolt clicked back with a soft metallic scrape like it had been pulled from the inside. The door did not swing open. It only loosened a gap, appearing at the seam, as if the trailer had exhaled. I stood there, staring at the monitors, waiting for my body to decide whether it belonged to me. Then a new sound rose from the gravel outside, not footsteps but a dragging scrape, slow and careful, like someone pulling something heavy toward my door. The radio voice said, "Calm," as a checklist item, "do not look away." I kept my eyes on the screen because the screen was the only place the site admitted what it was doing. At 5:59, 1 minute before the morning foreman arrived, every feed snapped back to normal camera views, as if nothing had happened. The trailer door was shut. Again, bolt-locked, handle still. Camera 3 showed an empty landing. No bag. No hard hat. The motion log showed no alerts. Clean night. When the foreman walked in at 6, he asked why I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. I told him someone had been inside the stairwell. He laughed and said the stairwell was chained all night. Then he frowned and said, "By the way, who put your vest up on the 12th floor rebar?" I stared at him. What vest? He held up his phone and showed me a photo one of the crew had taken at dawn. In the photo, my reflective security vest hung neatly on a piece of rebar, like a flag. Across the chest of the vest, someone had taped a strip of black electrical tape with 2 words in white ink, "Your route." The cemetery job is the one people laugh at until you're the one sitting alone at the gatehouse with a radio that keeps whispering your name, because cemeteries aren't scary for what's buried. They're scary for what still follows routine, after everyone else has gone home. I took the night watch at Pine Hollow Memorial because it was steady pay, and the manager told me, "It's quiet, just drive the loops and keep kids from hopping the fence." Pine Hollow wasn't a little churchyard. It was a sprawling property with winding roads, sections marked by letters, a small mausoleum complex, and motion cameras at the main gate, and a handful of internal points. My post was a 1-room gatehouse with a monitor, a patrol log, and a landline that connected to a county dispatcher who never wanted to talk. The manager gave me one rule that sounded like a joke. If you see a car inside after midnight, it's not supposed to be here. Then he added, not joking, and don't use the old radio channel. It picks up noise. The first part of the night was normal. I drove the loops, headlights sweeping over stones and trees, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own swallowing. At 2:41 inches the morning, the motion alert triggered at camera M, the mausoleum walkway. The feed showed the white stone corridor outside the mausoleum doors, lit by a single pole light that made long shadows. The walkway looked empty, but the motion icon stayed lit, as if something was moving slowly just out of frame under the camera's blind corner. I watched for a full minute. Nothing. Then, in the far edge of the frame near a stone pillar, a dark figure appeared. Not walking in. Not stepping from behind the pillar. Just there, standing perfectly still, facing the mausoleum doors like it was waiting to be let in. My stomach tightened because I had the same thought every guard eventually has. At night, stillness is not comfort, it is intention. I grabbed my keys and drove up the hill toward the mausoleum, telling myself it was probably a person, a visitor who got locked in a vandal. The road curved through trees. The mausoleum came into view pale and quiet, the pole light buzzing faintly. The walkway was empty. No figure. The doors were shut. I checked the handle. Locked. I shone my flashlight into the corners between pillars. Nothing. I went back to the gatehouse and looked at camera M again. The figure was back closer now to the doors by several feet. The timestamp matched real time. The motion icon did not trigger. My skin crawled because it meant the camera wasn't reacting to movement, it was reacting to my attention. I rewound the DVR. Playback showed the walkway empty the whole time. Clean stone, clean shadows, no figure at all. Live feed, the figure existed. On tape it didn't. I sat there staring, trying to hold on to logic when the landline rang. The caller ID didn't show a number. It showed a label, Section H. I didn't have a phone line that should display cemetery sections. I answered anyway because curiosity is a disease in night work. The line clicked, and I heard breathing steady and close and a faint tapping sound like a fingernail on plastic. Then a calm voice said, "Don't go to the mausoleum." My throat went dry. "Who is this?" I asked. Static then, the calm voice again. "You're watching the wrong door." The line went dead. I stared at the receiver as if it could explain itself. My radio, the new one the manager gave me, crackled once with static, then settled. I tried to call dispatch. No answer. I sat still, listening, and in the quiet, I heard a distant sound outside the gatehouse. Not footsteps, not wind, something like gravel shifting under a slow tire. I checked the gate camera. The entrance road was empty. No headlights. No car. I checked the internal camera at the back fence. Empty. Camera M still showed the figure by the mausoleum doors. I told myself the safest move was to sit tight until morning, let the manager deal with it. Then my monitor flickered and a second feed popped up that I didn't select, labeled Old Channel. The manager had told me not to use it. The feed showed a wider view of the cemetery road loop from a pole camera I didn't know existed, an angle high enough to see 3 sections at once. On that feed, my patrol vehicle was driving the loop, headlights on, moving steadily. My stomach dropped because my actual vehicle was parked outside the gatehouse, keys on my desk. The recorded patrol car on the screen was moving anyway, making the same loop I had made earlier, the same turns, the same speed. White text appeared over the feed in plain letters. Subject, routine. Under it, repeat. The radio on the desk gave the fingernail tap again, and the calm voice came through close and flat. Keep driving. I whispered, "I'm not driving." The voice replied, "You are." The old channel feed showed the patrol car slow near Section H, then stopped beside a row of stones. The driver door opened. A figure stepped out tall and still, and for 1 second the pole light caught the reflective stripes on the figure's vest. It was my vest. The figure walked not like a normal person, but with a smoothness that looked like missing frames toward a specific grave. The camera angle was too far to read the name, but my stomach tightened anyway, because the way it moved wasn't searching. It was going to where it already knew. The feed cut to a closer angle, as if the system wanted me to see. The grave marker was simple granite, and carved into it was my last name. My throat closed. I stood up so fast my chair scraped. I grabbed my keys and rushed outside to my real vehicle. It was where I left it. I started it with shaking hands and drove the loop towards Section H, telling myself the camera was wrong, the feed was old, a glitch. The cemetery roads were empty. No moving patrol car besides mine. No figure in the distance. Section H came into my headlights as rows of stones, like teeth. I stopped and stepped out. Flashlight beam, sweeping names, dates, moss. My breath sounded too loud. Then I saw it. A stone near the edge of the row had fresh dirt around the base, as if someone had recently dug and tamped it back down. The carved name on the stone matched mine. The dates were wrong, the birth year correct, the death year blank. Under the name was a line of smaller text that made my stomach drop night watch. I stepped back, heartbeat punching. My radio popped with static, and the calm voice whispered, "Now you found the right door." I turned my flashlight toward the trees, and the beam caught a reflective stripe for a split second, then nothing. I spun and saw no one. Then I heard a soft sound behind me. Fabric, rubbing fabric like someone standing close and shifting weight. I did not turn. I forced myself to walk back to my vehicle without running, because running in a cemetery feels like admitting you know what's chasing me. When I got back to the gatehouse, the monitor showed camera M again. The figure at the mausoleum doors was gone. The walkway was empty. The motion log was clean. The old channel feed had vanished. My desk landline was off the hook, receiver resting against the edge as if someone had lifted it and set it down. I picked it up slowly. Breathing filled the line, immediately close and calm, followed by the fingernail tap patient as a metronome. The voice said, "Good. You visited." I whispered, "Why?" The voice answered without emotion, "Because you keep guarding doors. We wanted you to see yours." I slammed the phone down and tried to laugh, because sometimes your body chooses laughter instead of collapse. The laughter died when I noticed the patrol logbook on my desk was open to a blank page, and on that blank page, in neat handwriting that matched my own, someone had written my route times for the night, perfectly detailed, including the loop, to Section H, that I had just driven. At the bottom of the page, 2 words were underlined, hard enough to dent the paper: return time. At 5:58, 2 minutes before sunrise, the gate camera showed a vehicle approaching the entrance road with no headlights. It rolled silently up to the closed gate and stopped. The driver door opened. A tall figure stepped out, wearing my reflective vest, and stood perfectly still, facing the gatehouse window, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. My radio tapped once, and the calm voice said softly, "End of shift." I did not move. I watched until the sky began to lighten. When the morning groundskeeper arrived at 6, he found me sitting in the gatehouse with the lights on and asked if anything happened. I told him there was a new stone in Section H with my name on it. He frowned and said, "There's no new stone. They don't install stones overnight." He offered to drive me out there to show me. We drove the loop together in daylight. Section H looked normal. The stone with my name wasn't there. No fresh dirt. No blank death year. The groundskeeper shrugged, like I was tired. Back at the gatehouse, he pointed at my vest hanging on the hook and said, "By the way, why is your vest muddy at the hem like you were kneeling?" I looked. The reflective vest was streaked with damp soil at the bottom edge, and on the inside collar, taped neatly where it would touch. My neck was a strip of black electrical tape, with 3 words written in thin white ink: "Your plot, now." If you ever take a security contract at an abandoned asylum and the client tells you it's just trespassers, remember that trespassers leave footprints, and what I dealt with left procedures. Briarwood State Hospital had been closed for years, but the city still owned the land and the developer still hadn't won the permit fight, so they hired 1 guard per night to keep kids from filming urban exploration videos, falling through rotted floors. My post was a heated trailer at the front gate, with a monitor wall, a radio, and a laminated map that marked the only approved patrol in the perimeter fence, and a quick visual check of the main entrance doors without going inside. The ruins sat back in the trees like a dark shipwreck, 3 brick buildings connected by glassless corridors, windows, boarded paint, peeling. On my second night, at 1252 a.m., camera 4 main hall entrance flickered and showed a shadow in the vestibule just beyond the chain double doors. The motion panel didn't light. The shadow didn't move. It was simply present, a tall vertical shape occupying the corner where the reception desk used to be. I rewound the DVR. Playback showed an empty vestibule, clean chain, no shadow. Live, feed the shadow existed. Then my radio popped with a tiny click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic, and a calm voice said, "Do your rounds." I froze. "Dispatch?" I asked. "Static," answered. Then the same calm voice, closer than it should have been. "Perimeter," then intake. Intake wasn't on the map. Intake was the old admitting wing the city had labeled unsafe entry. I locked the trailer, took my flashlight and walked the fence anyway, because refusing a patrol on night shift feels like inviting whatever's out there to choose your route for you. Halfway along the east side, I found a fresh strip of black electrical tape wrapped around the fence wire at eye level. On it, in thin white ink, were 2 words: good subject. I tried to treat it like a human problem. I checked the gate log, checked the tire tracks in the gravel, checked the sign-in sheet the city demanded we keep for any official entry. The sheet was blank except for my own name, but next to it, someone had added a second set of initials in handwriting that matched mine tighter and more careful, like a copy. I pulled the DVR event log and saw an entry labeled Intake Access, timestamped 1251A. 1 minute before the shadow appeared. There should not have been an intake access event, because nothing inside the fence was on an access system anymore. When I clicked the event thumbnail, it wasn't a corridor or a door. It was a close-up of a paper chart, clipped to a board, the kind patients used to carry. Across the top was a barcode, and under it my employee number, as if it were a patient ID. I stared until my eyes burned. Then I noticed the barcode wasn't random. It matched the number printed on my gate key tag. I put the tag down like it was hot, and walked outside to breathe cold air and prove to myself the trailer was real. The Asylum Ruins sat black behind the fence. No lights, no movement. Yet from somewhere deep on the property I heard a soft public address chime 2 tones, followed by a voice so faint I could barely make out the words. It sounded like an old hospital recording. Please report to intake. The sound was not on my radio. It was in the night itself, like the buildings were remembering how to talk. I finished the loop and returned to the trailer. Camera 4 still showed the shadow in the vestibule, still occupying that corner like a stain. At 131, a second camera feed opened by itself on my monitor wall, labeled Nurse Station. There was no nurse station camera in our system. The feed was stable and bright, showing a corridor inside the asylum. At the end of the hall, a fluorescent light buzzed over a counter where clipboards were stacked neatly as if the building had been cleaned. Above the counter, a red indicator lamp glowed with a tiny sign, Call. The lamp blinked once. My radio tapped again, and the calm voice said, Answer it. The trailer landline, a dead phone that had never rung, rang once. 1 sharp ring, then stopped. A second later, the nurse station feed showed the call lamp, blinking faster, impatient. A tall shape stepped into the lit zone and stood perfectly still behind the counter, facing the camera. No face detail, just a human outline swallowed by light. White text appeared over the feed in plain letters that weren't part of the DVR overlay. Intake waiting. Beneath it, process. My mouth went dry. I did what I was not supposed to do. I grabbed my keys and walked to the main doors. The chain was still tight. The padlock was still on. There was no legal way inside. Behind me, the gravel shifted softly, like a slow step. I did not turn. My radio tapped once, and the calm voice said almost gently, Don't look back in the yard. Use the camera. I went back to the trailer, shaking, and stared at camera 4. The vestibule shadow had moved closer to the chained doors by several feet, still without walking, as if frames were missing. The landline rang once. This time I answered because my body wanted the ring to stop. The line clicked, and I heard steady breathing close, and that same fingernail tapping on plastic. Then the calm voice said, State your name for intake. I whispered, No. The breathing paused, then resumed, and the voice said, Non-compliant. The nurse station feed changed to a close angle of a clipboard on the counter. A paper form was clipped to it clean and new. At the top it said admission. In the name field, my full name was already typed. Under reason for admission, it said Night Watch. The pen beside the clipboard lifted by itself, no hand visible, and hovered over the signature line as if waiting for my agreement. I slammed the receiver down. The monitors flickered. Every feed cut to a ceiling corner view inside my trailer, an angle I did not have. On that feed, I was sitting in the chair, with my hands folded calm, even though in real life I was standing. Behind the chair in the darkest corner by the heater vent, A tall figure stood perfectly still. The recorded version of me turned slowly and looked up toward the ceiling camera, then nodded once. White text appeared subject consents. My door handle rattled, once gentle, like a test. Then the deadbolt scraped back with a soft metallic sound as if someone inside the door had turned it. The calm voice came through the radio one last time, close as breath. Intake complete. Right before dawn, I checked the perimeter one last time and found the same black tape on the fence again, but the words had changed. It no longer said good subject. It said cleared for transfer. Under it, someone had drawn a small arrow pointing inward toward the dark buildings, like the property line was no longer a boundary. I peeled the tape off, and it came away warm, as if it had been pressed by a hand minutes ago. At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before shift, and every feed snapped back to normal. The landline sat quiet. The deadbolt was locked again. The morning supervisor arrived and asked if everything was quiet. I said yes. After he left, I noticed a clipboard on my desk that hadn't been there. A clean admission form was clipped to it. The signature line was blank, but the date field was filled in with today's date, and under disposition it said, returning. A strip of black tape was stuck to the bottom with 2 words in white ink. Next shift. If a woman in a white dress ever knocks on your security booth at 3 in the morning, the worst part is not the dress. The worst part is how normal she sounds, because your brain wants to help before it wants to survive. My night post that winter was at a small private museum that shared a parking lot with an office building. After midnight, the property was empty, except for me in a glass booth, by the vehicle gate heater. Humming cameras pointed at the driveway, the sidewalk, and the front steps. The rules were simple. No one enters after hours. No exceptions call police for any person on site. At 2:57 a.m., the gate camera flagged motion, and the driveway feed showed a figure walking up from the street. She moved slowly with her hands at her sides, wearing a pale dress that caught the sodium lights and looked almost white. She stopped under the light pole, just outside the gate arm, and raised her face toward my booth window, like she could see through the glare. I keyed the intercom and kept my voice calm. "Ma'am, the property is closed. Please step back to the sidewalk." She didn't step back. She smiled, small and polite, like she'd heard something funny. Then I heard a soft tap on the booth glass behind me. Not a rattle, a single fingertip knock. I turned and she was standing at my window inches from the glass. There was no time between the light pole and my door. No crunch of gravel. No gate alarm. She was simply there. Face, calm hair, dark dress, clean as paper. I did not open the door. I asked how she got inside the gate. She answered in a voice that was steady and pleasant, like a receptionist. "I just need you to let me in." I said I couldn't. She smiled wider and said, "Yes, you can." The heater clicked off by itself, and the booth felt colder, like the air had been swapped. I reached for my radio. The speaker gave a tiny click, like a fingernail, tapping plastic near the mic, and a calm voice came through on my channel, close and flat. "Don't use the word can't." She tapped the glass once with her fingernail gentle, and I felt the sound in my teeth. "It's cold," she said. "Let me in." I lifted my phone to call police again. The screen lit, then went black, and displayed a single word in white letters. "Wait." The call button grayed out, like my phone had been placed under rules. At the same time, my radio speaker gave that tiny click, the fingernail on plastic tap, and the calm voice repeated, "Don't use the word can't." The woman smiled, as if she liked that instruction. "Say you can," she whispered, and when I didn't, she leaned closer and spoke my full name perfectly, including the middle name that never appears on my badge like she'd pulled it from a file. My stomach dropped because I had never spoken that name at this job. I forced myself to look at the monitors. The driveway camera still showed her standing under the light pole by the gate arm, unmoving as if she had never crossed the lot. I rewound the DVR. Playback showed an empty driveway. No woman. The timestamp jumped cleanly like frames had been removed. I realized then it wasn't about letting her into the property. It was about letting her into my sentence. Once you say you can, the place treats it like consent. I swallowed and chose my words like they were bolts. I will not open the door, I said. Her smile sharpened. Good, she said. Then open the window. The latch on the tiny transaction slot clicked, and the slot slid open a fraction on its own. Cold air poured in. I shoved it closed, but the latch refused to catch. The monitors flickered, and a new small window appeared, labeled Booth Cam, a ceiling corner angle inside my booth that did not exist on any map. A window labeled Booth Cam appeared on my monitor wall. It showed a ceiling corner view inside my booth that did not exist. On that feed, I was seated calmly at the desk while she stood behind my chair. The Booth Cam version of me turned his head and nodded once. White text appeared, subject complied. My door handle rattled, once gentle like a test. The woman at the glass smiled and said, "Now we don't have to pretend." On the driveway feed, her figure shifted closer to the gate arm without walking like missing frames. The gate arm lifted by itself. The calm voice on the radio said, almost approving, "Good." Access granted. The woman pressed her palm to the glass and left a faint print of moisture shaped like a hand. "You should call me in," she said. "That's what night watchmen do. They keep doors. They announce who enters." She leaned closer and softened her voice into something almost kind. "Say my name." I didn't know her name. I looked down at my sign-in clipboard and saw a fresh line in handwriting that matched mine 300A. Visitor admitted. I tore the page out and crushed it in my fist. She waited patient, then knocked 3 times on the glass, each knock softer than the last. On the desk between us lay a form with my name typed at the top, and her name field blank. A pen hovered over my signature line. White text appeared, "Please confirm entry." At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before relief, the monitors snapped back to normal. The driveway was empty. The gate arm was down. The heater clicked back on. The transaction slot latch was secured. The booth felt suddenly ordinary again, the way nightmares do when they decide you can live with them. The morning guard arrived and asked why my face was pale. I told him someone had tried to get in. He laughed and said the cameras show nothing all night. Then he pointed at the sign-in clipboard and asked why I had written a visitor entry at 300 a.m. I looked down. The torn page was back in place, and the line read 300 a.m. Visitor admitted. White dress. Under it was my signature, perfect and steady. I hadn't signed anything. As the morning guard walked away, the booth glass near the transaction slot fogged briefly, as if someone breathed on it from the inside, and a soft feminine voice inches from my ear whispered, "Thank you for letting me in." If your building has a drop ceiling, understand this. There's a whole second hallway up there, and it doesn't follow the rules of the one you walk in. I learned that on a contract at a mid-rise office building that had gone mostly vacant. The kind of place with dark floors, silent elevators, and a lobby that smelled like carpet shampoo even when nobody stepped on it. My job was to sit in a glass security booth by the revolving doors, watch 12 CCTV feeds, and do an hourly patrol through the first 3 floors. The lobby looked clean and modern, but the ceiling was a grid of white tiles, hiding lights, ducts, and miles of cable. On my 3rd night, at 1:41 a.m., I heard a soft thump directly above my head, followed by 2 lighter taps, like someone testing a tile. The lobby cameras showed empty marble. The motion panel stayed dark. I told myself it was the building, settling because the alternative was a person directly overhead. 10 minutes later, the thump came again, closer to the booth's corner, and a few grains of white dust drifted down onto my desk. I looked up and saw one tile above the filing cabinet sitting a hair lower than the rest, the edge barely not flush. I stood on my chair and pressed a finger against it. The tile flexed, then settled as if weight had shifted away the moment I touched it. Then my radio gave a tiny click, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic, and a calm voice came through on my channel. "Close and flat. Don't stand on chairs." My throat went dry. I keyed the mic and asked who was on. Static answer. Then the voice again. Patient. You hear the ceiling, but you keep pretending it's the building. I grabbed my flashlight and did the patrol early, because movement feels like control. On floor 2, in the conference corridor, a ceiling tile near the copy room was slightly misaligned. The corner lifted enough to show a thin, black seam, and beneath it, insulation dust marked the wall like a thumbprint. I stood there listening, and above the tile I heard the faintest sound of fabric, rubbing fabric like someone shifting weight on cardboard. I went back to the booth and forced myself to be methodical. Every feed looked normal, until camera 8 flickered and returned with a new overlay that wasn't in the system font. Plain white letters sat above the timestamp, plenum. A new window opened by itself, showing a view I shouldn't have had. The inside of the ceiling cavity, a narrow tunnel of beams and ducts, wires running like veins, and below the faint rectangle of my booth roof through the grid. The image was stable, bright enough to see dust floating. In the far end of that tunnel, something darker than shadow was crouched between the beams. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It was simply present in a space my eyes had never been allowed to picture as a room. My breath caught, and on the plenum feed, the dark shape lifted its head a fraction like it had heard me breathe. I looked up in real life. The tiles were still. I looked back at the monitor, and the shape was closer by a foot, without any visible crawl like frames had been cut out. White text appeared on the plenum feed, subject notices occupant. I backed away from the monitors until my shoulders hit the booth wall. From above I heard a slow scrape, like something dragging itself carefully across metal supports. I reached for my phone to call the police. The screen lit, then went black, and displayed one word: wait. The radio clicked again, and the calm voice said, almost gently, "If you call, you'll make them run, and then you'll lose them." I whispered, "Who is them?" The voice answered, "Everyone who lives above your lights." At 2:18 a.m., I heard a soft pop, like a tile being lifted and set back down. On the plenum feed, the dark shape had moved to a position directly above my booth. Something pale caught the camera light, for a second fingertips or the edge of a face, then vanished back into darkness. My booth ceiling vent rattled wet. A thin strip of black electrical tape fluttered down through the vent slats and landed on my keyboard. On it, in neat white ink, were 2 words: "Stay quiet." I should have left right then, but leaving on a night shift is never as simple as walking out. When I stood up, the lobby camera grid flickered, and for half a second, a new feed appeared, labeled Booth Cam, a ceiling corner view looking down at my desk. I didn't have a booth camera. In that feed, I was sitting in my chair, with my hands folded calm, while in real life I was standing with my heart pounding. The booth cam version of me turned his head toward the booth's dead corner by the heater vent, and a tall dark shape stood behind him in the corner where the heater vent met the wall. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. The booth cam version of me nodded once, small and deliberate, and plain white text appeared over the feed: "Subject returns to station." I tried the lobby doors anyway. The revolving door was locked, even though it was on a timed release. The crash bar didn't budge. On my phone, the emergency call screen opened, then grayed out, and the same plain word appeared again: "Wait." The radio voice softened, almost like instruction during training: "You're safer when you follow procedure. Return to your station." My hands went numb because that sentence was true in every normal job, and that's why it worked. I sat back down. Above me, the ceiling settled with a quiet sigh, like something satisfied. I opened the maintenance closet behind reception and found a folding ladder. The ladder wasn't supposed to be accessible at night, but the padlock was already off, resting neatly on the shelf like it had been returned. I set the ladder under the misaligned tile and aimed my flashlight at the seam, trying to see into the crack. The tile lifted a fraction on its own, silently, as if someone on the other side had matched my motion. Warm air flowed down, smelling faintly of sweat and vending machine chips. The plenum feed expanded to full screen, and a face appeared between the supports, close enough that the camera should have captured detail, but the features stayed smeared in darkness, like the lens refused to name it. Only the eyes were clear, fixed on the camera, like a person staring through a peephole. The calm voice on the radio whispered, "You keep watching corners, but you never watch the ceiling." Then, softer, you gave us a room. I backed away from the ladder and sat down slowly, because sitting felt like compliance, and I needed the night to think I was compliant. Above me, the ceiling made a quiet settling sound as if something had laid down to rest. At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before relief, the plenum feed vanished. The grid returned to normal. The tiles looked perfectly aligned. The black tape on my desk was still there. When the day supervisor arrived, he joked that I looked sick. I told him to call facilities and check the ceiling. He laughed and said nobody can fit up there. Then he paused, staring at the filing cabinet. A fine line of dust was falling from the tile seam in a steady stream like sand in an hourglass. He climbed onto my chair and pushed the tile up, and a folded blanket slid out and dropped onto my desk, followed by an empty water bottle and a stack of printed security patrol logs. The logs were mine, my times, my routes, my notes, copied cleanly as if someone had been studying them. On the top sheet, in neat handwriting that matched mine too closely, were 3 words underlined, hard enough to dent the paper. "Thank you, landlord." Knocking is supposed to be simple, a request, a warning, a mistake. On night shift, knocking becomes a test. Because the only thing between you and the dark is a sheet of glass, and whatever rules you think still apply. My post was a small parking garage security booth at the entrance lane. A glass box with a sliding window, a heater, a desk, and cameras aimed at the gate, arm, and the sidewalk. The garage belonged to a hospital annex, so the property never fully slept. But after midnight, the traffic died, and my job became a routine of watching empty lanes and logging plate numbers that never came. At 3:03 a.m., I heard 3 soft knocks on the booth window to my left. Not pounding, not frantic, polite, measured, like someone trying not to disturb. I turned, expecting a lost driver. The lane outside was empty. The gate arm was down. The sidewalk was clear. I checked the camera feed for the entrance. Empty frame. Clean timestamp. Then I heard 3 knocks again. Same rhythm. Same gentle pressure. And the glass vibrated against my fingertips when I placed my hand on it, proving the sound was real. I keyed the intercom and kept my voice calm. Garage closed. Please, step back to the sidewalk. My own words sounded wrong in the empty booth. Like an announcement to nobody, the radio on my desk gave a tiny click. Like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic. And a calm voice came through on my channel. Close and flat. Don't use the intercom. My throat went dry. Who is this? I asked. Static. Then the calm voice again knocked back. I didn't. I stared at the window. Because even a simple instruction can feel like a trap when it comes from a voice that shouldn't exist. 3 knocks sounded again. But this time they came from the glass behind me. The rear panel of the booth that faced the garage interior. I spun in my chair. Nothing outside. Nothing reflected. Only my own pale face in the glass. The front entrance camera flickered for half a second and returned with a line of plain white text that wasn't in the system font visitor waiting. Below it, another line. Request, response. I rewound the DVR to see who walked up. Playback showed the empty lane the entire time. Live feed still showed the same plain text, as if the camera itself was impatient. I reached for my phone. The screen lit, then went black and displayed a single word. Wait. The emergency call icon grayed out like a locked door. 3 knocks again. And I realized the rhythm wasn't random. It was the exact cadence we used in training to confirm a radio check. 3 taps meant, "I'm here. I hear you. Respond," the calm voice on the radio said. Almost kindly, you know the protocol. I forced myself to breathe slowly and did the one thing that felt like control. I opened the incident logbook and wrote the time. 3:03 a.m. And the words "knocking" heard as soon as my pen lifted from the page. The printer on the shelf beside me. A small receipt printer we used for parking slips. Clicked once and spit out a thin strip of paper. On it, in plain black letters, were 2 words: "Knock back." My stomach tightened because the booth didn't have an automated system that could print messages. It only printed ticket numbers. 3 knocks sounded again. Closer. And the glass to my left fogged briefly, as if someone had breathed on it from inches away. In the fog, a finger traced a short line. Then another. Then another. Slow and deliberate. Until the letters formed a simple instruction: open. I wiped the fog away with my sleeve. The glass was dry. The letters vanished like they had never been there. But my skin still felt cold where the fog had been. I stood and looked out the front window again. The lane was empty. The security mirror over the gate showed nobody standing in the blind corner. And yet the knocking continued. Now traveling 3 taps on the front window. Then 3 taps on the side. Then 3 taps on the back. Like something circling the booth without ever appearing on camera, every time the taps landed. The corresponding camera feed flickered, and a new label appeared above the timestamp, changing as if it were updating a map. Front. Left. Rear. Then it added a final label. And my stomach dropped when I saw it inside. 3 knocks sounded from under the desk. Not loud, but clear. Tapping the metal support bar near my knee. The calm voice on the radio whispered, "You keep looking out. It's already in." I backed toward the booth door and grabbed the handle. It didn't budge. The deadbolt had slid into place on its own. And I heard the soft metallic scrape that told me it had been moved from the inside. The entrance camera grid flickered, and a new feed appeared, labeled Booth Cam. A ceiling corner view inside my booth that did not exist on any map. In that feed, I was sitting in my chair, calm, hands folded on the desk, while in real life, I was standing at the door with my heart hammering, behind the booth cam version of me. A dark shape stood in the corner by the heater, close enough that its shadow touched the edge of the desk. The booth cam version of me lifted his right hand slowly and tapped the glass 3 times. At the same moment, I heard the knocks on the real glass, 3 taps, perfectly in sync. As if my own body had been drafted into the signal without my permission. White text appeared over the booth cam feed. Subject confirms presence. I shook my head hard and said, "Stop." And the calm voice answered on the radio. Flat as a checklist item, continue interaction. Then, softer, it's rude to ignore. The ticket printer clicked again and produced another strip. This one had my employee ID printed at the top like a receipt header. And beneath it, 1 line, response recorded, on the window to my left, where my palm print had smeared earlier. A strip of black electrical tape appeared as if it had been pressed onto the glass from the other side. 2 words were written in neat white ink, polite guard. I didn't remember touching tape. I didn't remember opening any drawer, and that was the point if you can't remember doing it. You can't swear you didn't. At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before relief, the booth door clicked and unlocked. The deadbolt slid back with a soft scrape like a sigh. The knocking stopped. The camera overlays returned to normal fonts. The lane outside looked harmless again. When the day guard arrived, he asked why the inside of the glass had faint knuckle marks on it, like someone had been tapping from this side all night. I told him nobody had been there. He laughed and said, "Then why does the log show?" You answered. He pointed at my incident book, in my handwriting. Under 303 a.m., a new line had appeared. Visitor acknowledged. Next to it was my signature, steady and clear, like I had signed a delivery receipt. As I stared, the radio gave one last quiet tap, and the calm voice whispered, "Close as breath, good manners." Then it added, "Almost pleasantly see you at home." That afternoon, after I finally slept, I woke to 3 soft knocks that seemed to come from inside my apartment. Not the door, not the wall, my bathroom mirror. I stared at my own reflection, and the sound repeated, polite and measured. And for a second the glass fogged, as if someone on the other side had exhaled. A single message appeared in the haze before it cleared, knocked back. The radio is supposed to be your lifeline on night shift. The one thing that proves you're not truly alone, even when the building is empty. But the night I heard the chatter start, I learned a radio can also be a mouth for something that doesn't need lungs. I was assigned to a quiet, municipal records building. A squat concrete place with sealed windows, fluorescent hallways, and rows of file rooms that smelled like dust and old paper. The city didn't want anyone stealing documents or sleeping inside. So they posted one guard overnight and gave me a portable radio tied into a shared channel with other city sites, and a dispatcher who mostly sounded half asleep. My booth was in the lobby with a monitor wall and an incident binder full of rules no one followed unless something went wrong. The first hours were dull. Just my patrols and the soft hum of HVAC. At 1:17 a.m., my radio clicked with a tiny sound, like a fingernail tapping plastic near the mic. Then a burst of voices spilled through fast, overlapping, confident, like an active police channel. Unit 7. Copy. A man's voice said. Hold at corridor C. Another voice answered. Copy. Corridor C. Eyes on subject. My stomach tightened because there was no Unit 7 on our security roster, and the city dispatcher never used that cadence. I keyed my mic and asked dispatch to confirm traffic. Static hissed. Then the chatter continued as if I hadn't spoken. Do not approach. The first voice said, subject is compliant when observed. The word compliant hit me like a cold hand, because I'd seen it before, in system overlays and logs that weren't supposed to talk back. I looked up at the monitors. The lobby feeds were empty. The hallway camera showed nothing. The motion panel was dark, yet the radio voices sounded like they were watching something move. He's moving. A woman's voice said, calm and clinical. 2 steps. Then stop. He's practicing. Another voice laughed softly. Not amused. More like satisfied. Good pace. Repeat route. I stood up. suddenly sure I was being talked about. I checked the radio display and saw the channel number was correct. I tried switching to an alternate city channel. The dial beeped. The display changed. And the voices did not. They stayed perfectly clear, as if the radio was no longer receiving. It was playing. He's listening. The woman's voice said, "He thinks it's about the building," I whispered. "Who is this?" And my own whisper felt embarrassing in the empty booth. The radio answered with that fingernail tap again. Then the same voices. Closer, somehow. "Don't answer him." The man said, "He'll learn faster if he believes it's dispatch." I backed away from the desk until my shoulders hit the wall. Then forced myself to do the only thing that ever helps procedure. I opened the incident binder, flipped to the communications section, and read the steps as if reading them could anchor me. Step 1. Confirm with dispatch. Step 2. Log interference. Step 3. Switch to secondary. I keyed the mic again and called dispatch by name. This time, a bored male voice answered. Slow and annoyed, like he'd been woken. "Records." "What do you need?" Relief flooded me so fast it almost made me dizzy. I told him I was getting unknown chatter on the channel. He sighed and said, "I don't hear anything. Channel's clear." As he spoke, the other voices continued underneath, and the horror sharpened, because it meant the chatter wasn't on the shared channel. It was only in my unit. I told dispatch I was switching to secondary. He said okay and signed off. The moment the official voice left, the chatter became crisp, as if it had been waiting for privacy. "Now we can talk?" the woman said. The man answered, "Keep him steady. Don't spook him yet." I did the one thing that felt like real resistance. I shut the radio off. The power button clicked. The screen went dark, and the voices continued anyway from the radio speaker. As if the radio didn't need power to be a mouth. I stared, hands numb, and the man's voice said, almost approving, "Good." He tried to shut off. Then the woman, he always tries. That's why he's useful. The monitors flickered, and a new small window opened by itself on the screen, labeled Hallway Orcs. I didn't have an Orcs hallway camera. The feed showed a ceiling corner view of Corridor C. A long hallway lined with closed doors and file room placards. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the corridor looked empty. Then, without walking into frame, a tall, dark shape occupied the far end, standing perfectly still near the corner where the hall turned. The motion sensor icon did not trigger. The system didn't register movement. It registered presence after I reacted. White text appeared on the feed in plain letters that weren't part of the city system subject observes. The radio voices went quiet for one breath, as if listening to my heartbeat. Then the man said, "Tell him to patrol." The woman replied, "No, let him choose it. Choice is better." The chatter returned with a different tone, like a training scenario. "Records. Confirm patrol." A voice said in a dispatcher cadence that sounded almost like my real dispatcher, but not quite. "Proceed to Corridor C." I didn't move. I didn't want to be a good subject, but my legs shifted anyway. That old habit of getting up when a radio tells you to. The woman's voice softened. "Please." See, he follows a voice even when he knows it's wrong. That's human. I grabbed my flashlight and walked into the lobby. Not running, because running turns you into prey. In the hall, the fluorescent lights buzzed. My footsteps echoed The building felt like it was listening to the soles of my shoes. I reached the corridor intersection and paused. Beam steady on the blank wall, because I didn't want to look around the corner into Corridor C. The radio chatter murmured behind me from the dead units, still on my belt. "He's at the corner," the woman said. "He's doing the thing where he pretends he didn't hear us." The man answered, amused. "He'll look. They always look." I forced myself to turn my flashlight beam first, letting light enter the corridor before my eyes did. Corridor C was empty, long and clean. Doors shut, but halfway down, on the floor, near a file room door, someone had placed a strip of black electrical tape like a marker. 2 words were written in neat white ink. "Look here." My throat went dry. That tape had followed me from job to job, like a signature. The radio tapped once. The man said softly. He found the marker. The woman good. Continue. I backed away from the tape without touching it. And the moment my heel crossed back into the intersection, the overhead lights in Corridor C turned off in a sequence moving toward me. 1 section at a time. Like darkness, advancing at a walking pace. No motion sensors triggered. The lights behaved like a person. My flashlight beam shook. The radio voices changed. Less like dispatch now, and more like observers taking notes. "He backs up," the woman said. "He keeps distance from artifacts." The man replied, "He's learning. Reward him." The lights snapped back on, all at once. The tape on the floor was gone. In its place was a paper folder. City, Manila. Standing upright against the wall, as if someone had propped it. A label was typed on the tab, Incident. My name was on it, spelled correctly. Employee number included. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The folder was a message, "You are the file now," behind me. From the lobby, I heard the softest sound of a door latch, like the booth door closing itself. I turned and walked back fast. The booth door was shut. I tried the handle. Locked. Not keyed. Held. My radio. Still off. Spoke in that calm voice I'd heard in other jobs. The one that didn't bother with chatter when it wanted to be understood. "Good," it said. "Now you're in the right room." The chatter voices returned under it. Quieter. Like a crowd behind a glass wall. "Ask him to sign," the man said. "No," the woman replied. "Show him he already did." The monitor wall flickered, and the incident management screen opened by itself. A system only supervisors used. On it was a digital log entry stamped 117A. M. Radio check complete. Under it, subject responded. The signature line displayed my name in a neat cursive that looked like mine, but steadier. I hadn't touched the keyboard. My hands were visible. I whispered. I didn't sign anything. And the calm voice answered. "You did. You always do. You confirm. That's your job." The lobby camera window changed to a ceiling corner view inside my booth that did not exist. On that feed, I was sitting calmly at the desk, hands folded, while in real life, I was standing with my back to the wall, behind the seated version of me, in the booth's dead corner by the heater vent. A tall, dark shape stood perfectly still, close enough that its shadow touched the chair back. The seated me lifted his hand and tapped the radio 3 times. Polite and measured. And in the real booth, I heard 3 taps from inside the radio casing, like something knocking from within. White text appeared over the booth feed. Subject confirms channel. Then another line. Channel open. I shut my eyes for 1 second, and in that 1 second, the chatter stopped completely. Like a room going silent when the teacher walks in. When I opened my eyes, the booth door was unlocked. The building felt normal again, in the worst possible way. Like it could switch itself off and on. At 5:59 a.m., 1 minute before relief, the radio screen lit up on its own and displayed a final message in plain white letters. Thank you for your transmission. When the day supervisor arrived, he asked why my radio battery was missing. I looked down. The battery compartment was open, and the battery was gone. On the desk where it should have been sat, a strip of black electrical tape with 3 words in white ink. Keep talking. God. The reason I quit my museum job wasn't one big dramatic moment. It was the way the building started treating me like part of the collection. Like my fear was an exhibit it could curate. The museum was small, private, the kind of place that displayed artifacts behind glass and relied on donors more than ticket sales. They hired overnight security because a rash of vandalism in the city made the board nervous, and they wanted someone to sit in the lobby booth, watch the cameras, and do timed patrols through the galleries. The rules were strict: no food in galleries, no touching displays, no entering the climate-controlled vault wing, and always keep the visitor doors locked. My first nights were quiet. Marble floors, dark windows reflecting my own movement, a soft hum of climate systems keeping paintings and textiles alive. On the night I quit, at 12:11 a.m., the motion panel tripped for Gallery 3. The portrait hall, camera 6, showed the long room lit by dim security lights. Framed faces watching from walls. Benches aligned. Velvet ropes in place. The alert stayed red. Sustained, as if something was pacing. On the feed, nothing moved. I rewound. Playback showed nothing. Live feed. The alert persisted. I walked the hall physically. The room was empty. The portraits were still. Their eyes painted in a way that makes you feel watched, even in daylight. I returned to the booth, and the alert dropped the moment I sat down. Like the building only wanted the act of standing. At 1:03 a.m., my radio clicked with that familiar fingernail tap on plastic. Then a calm voice spoke on a channel that should have been silent. Good posture, it said. My stomach tightened because that phrase belonged to other nights, other buildings. Like a note left in my file. I keyed the mic and asked if anyone was on. Static. The calm voice returned. Closer than a transmission should be. Patrol again. I didn't want to, but my legs moved anyway. Because night shift turns instructions into reflex. I walked Gallery 3 slower, checking corners, checking behind benches, checking the emergency exit door that was alarmed and sealed. Nothing. Then I noticed something small and wrong that made my skin go cold. The velvet rope stanchions were arranged differently than earlier, angled inward like they were guiding a path toward the center portrait. I knew they were different because guards memorize layouts without meaning to. You learn where objects are, so you can tell when a person has touched them. The center portrait was of a man in a dark suit, painted 100 years ago, with a calm expression and a hand resting on a cane. His eyes seemed to follow my flashlight beam. On the plaque beneath the frame, the name line looked smeared. as if someone had rubbed it. I leaned closer, without touching, and saw new letters scratched lightly into the metal beneath the real name. Too faint to read at a glance, I backed away and returned to the booth. Heart thudding, and pulled up camera 6 again. The stanchions on the feed were in their old positions. Normal. Straight. In the gallery they were angled inward. Live camera refused to admit the change. I rewound. Playback showed the normal layout. The building was doing the same trick again, reality in front of me. Cleanliness on tape at 127A M. A new small window opened on the monitor wall, labeled Vault Cam. There was no Vault camera on my authorized list. The feed was stable and bright, showing a white hallway with sealed doors and a keypad at the end. The vault wing was off limits to me at night. In the center of the feed, a door stood slightly open, just an inch. A thin black wedge, like a mouth, not fully closed. White text appeared on the feed in plain letters. Access requested. Beneath it, confirm. The calm voice on the radio said, almost gently, "You like proof." The old fear rose in me, because it was true. I looked for a way to shut the feed, but the window had no close button. No menu. Like it wasn't software I could command. The door on VaultCam opened another inch. Slow and deliberate. Like it was breathing. I stood up, and the lobby camera flickered into a ceiling corner view of my booth that did not exist on the system map. On that feed, I was seated at my desk. Calm. Hands folded. While in real life I was standing behind the seated version of me, in the dead corner by the heater vent. A tall, dark shape stood perfectly still. The seated me turned his head and nodded once. Like agreement, white text appeared. Subject consents. I whispered, "No." And the calm voice answered, "Not no, not yet." The museum felt suddenly warmer, like the climate system had shifted from the galleries. Faint and distant. I heard the soft squeak of stanchion bases sliding on marble. Slow. Careful. Like someone rearranging the route again. At 206A M. The motion panel tripped in Gallery 1. The main exhibit hall. Camera 2 showed a wide view of glass cases, sculpted pieces, and the center display. A large glass cube with an empty plinth inside, reserved for rotating artifacts. The hall looked empty. Then, without walking into frame, a figure appeared standing beside the cube. It was me. Same uniform. Same posture. Flashlight held low. The figure on the camera didn't look like a ghost. It looked like a recording of me placed into the live feed. I stared until my eyes watered. The figure turned its head slowly toward the camera and smiled. Small and polite. The way you smile when you're trying to reassure someone. Then the feed flickered and the figure vanished. I rewound immediately. Playback showed an empty hall. My throat tightened because the building wasn't showing me strangers. It was showing me versions of myself. The calm voice on the radio said, "Exhibit ready," I whispered. "Stop." And the voice replied, "You keep guarding. We keep collecting." I forced myself to do the professional thing. Call the board's emergency contact. Call police. Call anyone. My phone screen lit, then went black and displayed one word in white letters: wait. The call button grayed out like a locked door. The printer behind me clicked once and spit out a thin receipt strip. On it, in plain black letters, was a sentence, "Please proceed to Gallery 3. Beneath it, Donna viewing. My hands went numb. I didn't go. I stayed in the booth, watching cameras, because cameras felt like the only place the building admitted anything, even when it edited itself. At 3:11 a.m., the background audio system in the museum, which was always off at night, turned on by itself. Not music. A soft guided tour narration began playing through ceiling speakers in a calm, professional voice. "Welcome," it said. "Tonight's feature is Night Watch." My stomach dropped because the voice sounded like mine. Same cadence. Same tired rasp. The narration continued. "Observe the subject as he follows procedure. Note his compliance when presented with proof. Notice the hesitation before consent." I stood up, shaking, and the booth camera feed returned. Ceiling corner view, showing me seated calmly at the desk again. While in real life I was standing, the recorded me lifted his hand and signed a paper on the desk with slow, steady strokes. I looked down at my real desk. A form was there that had not been there earlier, clipped to a board like an intake sheet, except this one had the museum letterhead. At the top it read, "Acquisition," under item name, "Night Watchman." Under provenance, multiple sites. Under condition, responsive. The signature line at the bottom was blank, and a pen rested beside it. On the pen was a strip of black electrical tape with 2 words in white ink. "Sigain, here." The calm voice on the radio softened. Almost kind. "It's paperwork. You like paperwork." I did not touch the pen. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The guided tour voice continued overhead, describing my fear like it was a feature. "Note," it said, "how the subject avoids corners, yet returns to them. This is learned behavior." The lobby lights dimmed slightly, the way they do when a building enters nighttime mode. And in the dimness, the glass display case in the lobby caught my reflection. In the reflection, someone stood behind me, tall and still. I spun. Nothing. The radio tapped once. Patient, like a metronome. And the calm voice said, "Go see your label." Against every instinct, I walked to Gallery 3 one last time. Because sometimes the only way to end a test is to look at the result. The stanchions were now arranged in a perfect corridor leading to the center portrait. The plaque beneath the portrait glinted under security lights. I leaned close enough to read the faint, scratched letters beneath the painted man's name. They weren't random. They were a new label. Carefully etched, "Night Watchman." On loan, below it. Smaller, "Do not touch the glass." My throat closed because the museum wasn't just watching me, it was filing me. I backed away and returned to the booth, intending to grab my things and leave the keys on the monitor wall. The vault cam feed expanded again. The door at the end of the vault hallway was now fully open. Inside was darkness. White text appeared, "Return item." Beneath it, "Yourself." I sat down, hard. Breath shallow. And the calm voice spoke close as breath. End of shift. At 5:59 a.m. 1 minute before relief. Every feed snapped back to normal, authorized cameras. The guided tour audio shut off cleanly. The acquisition form vanished from my desk as if it had never existed. When the morning manager arrived, he smiled and asked if the night was quiet. I told him I was resigning. He laughed, like I was joking. Then saw my face and stopped. I handed him my keys and walked out into the morning without waiting for permission. Behind me, through the museum's glass doors, I saw the lobby display case that usually held a small antique watch. This morning, the watch was gone. In its place, propped neatly on the velvet cushion, was my security badge. A strip of black electrical tape crossed it like a curator's tag, and in thin white ink it read, "On exhibit." I kept walking anyway, because the only way to stop being collected is to refuse the building your last look back.